Ladies and gentlemen, thank you. We could take our seats if we like. We're going to begin the open forum here at the Studio City Library on the November 6th general election ballot. So, without further delay, today, folks, could we just have a seat for the beginning, and we can then obviously continue. Today we have a candidate for the Secretary of State in California who has come to tell us all that we need to know about his campaign for that office. His name is Mark Meuser, and he's here. Thank you. Whatever you're more comfortable. Would you like to?
I prefer to stand.
Although, okay, fair enough.
So you want to have a camera? Yeah, the camera's on the...
Okay, I guess I have to sit.
Fair enough.
But I'm much more dramatic in life. Hello, everybody, and thank you for coming out. We know who is the political junkies and who's not the sports junkies based upon who showed up here today. But, you know, I'm running for California Secretary of State, and most people go, okay, what's the Secretary of State do? And they are the chief election officer of the state of California. You get to vote for your congressman, who represents you in DC. You get to vote for your assemblymen. They represent you in Sacramento. And the thing is, it doesn't matter what your party is. 70% of Californians do not believe that their vote actually matters. So who is responsible for that? Is it your congressman? Is it your assemblyman? And the answer is, it's your Secretary of State. Because your Secretary of State is the chief election officer of the state of California. So let's look at what's going on with California elections. Let's look at what's going on in elections in the United States of America. Let's start with MIT. They have ranked all elections in the United States of America, and they have determined that California elections are the third worst elections in the United States of America.
Well, that's due to the candidates.
Pardon me? No, that's just due to the matrix. How many provisional ballots, voter turnout, percentage of registration, what we're doing with our military ballots, what's happening with provisional ballots, how many rejections, how long our lines are, how many ways people have to register to vote. When you look at the concrete matrix of elections, California gets a failing grade. But then some people will say, okay, well, somebody has to get a failing grade. At least we're in the United States of America. We've taught the world how to vote. But according to Harvard, they took the 24 Western democracies and examined them for election integrity. And of the 28 Western democracies, the United States of America is ranked 28th. Jimmy Carter was once asked, because Jimmy Carter travels around the world, third world countries, monitoring their elections to make sure that there's integrity in their systems. And he once was asked, would you do United States of America? He says, no, United States of America elections are a joke. We do not hold ourselves up to the standards that we demand of third world countries when they vote. We have a crisis in California. We have a crisis in the United States regarding the integrity of our elections. Again, I repeat, about 70% of all Californians do not believe that their vote even matters. And it is the Secretary of State's duty as the chief election officer of the state of California to ensure that there is integrity in our system. For the last month, I've been traveling around the state of California doing Facebook Lives, highlighting examples of the problems we have with just our voter registration. Like out in Malibu, 75 people registered to vote at a non-existent address. 15 people who voted in June of this year. 31 people registered to vote at a check cashing store in Gardenia. 23 people registered to vote at a commercial laundromat in Long Beach. 12 people registered to vote at a miniature golf course. Today, here in Studio City, I did a Facebook Live at a P.O. box. 24 people registered to vote there. See, the thing is, where you're registered to vote is your residence. You could have your mail forwarded to a P.O. box, but these people actually were registered saying that they lived there. Why is that a problem? Because they may actually live in a different congressional district. And now they're diluting the voice of those people who actually live in that district. And while the people may not be intending to dilute a vote, the Secretary of State is responsible to maintain the voter rolls. And it is actually a very easy thing to do to fix this. Because if they compared the voter rolls with the tax assessment records, they would have seen that that was a commercial property. And they could have sent notices to the 24 people saying, we notice that you're not actually registered to vote at your residence. You need to register at your residence so that you can vote for the people who are in the district where you reside. And there are hundreds of locations around the state of California, P.O. boxes, where 20 to 100 people are registered to vote, which means they may be diluting somebody else's vote. 28 people registered to vote at a motel that's been closed for 2 years. That's just touching the easy stuff. How about 23,108 people registered to vote in the state of California who are older than the oldest person living in the state of California? The oldest person living in California was born on July 24th, 1906. And there's 23,108 people registered to vote who were born before July 23rd or earlier. And 16,780 of them voted in the presidential election of 2016. 16,780 of them voted in our elections. We got a crisis in California concerning the integrity of our election, and it's not a partisan issue. Let me illustrate. At 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, there is a resident of that address that has a cell phone. And on that cell phone is an app called Twitter. And he likes to tweet about non-citizens casting illegal ballots. And thus his supporters on the right are concerned about the integrity of the elections because they believe non-citizens are voting. In fact, just this last week when he was in Houston, he talked about illegals in California voting. But election integrity is not a right or left issue, because on the left, Jill Stein raised millions of dollars so that there could be a presidential recount in Michigan and Wisconsin. And may I say, I was one of the first attorneys that they flew into Wisconsin to be a part of that presidential recount, because I'm an election law attorney. This is what I do. And at that presidential recount, millions of people believed that the vote tallies reported were not the accurate reports, because they figured somebody had tampered with, somebody had changed the election results. You see, election integrity is not a partisan issue. I am a Republican. That's what it's going to show on the ballot. But I have people who were in the Obama administration who are supporting my campaign because they understand we need integrity in our elections. I have Bernie Sanders supporters who feel that in 2016 that there was some funny business going on in the elections in San Diego, and the Secretary of State refused to actually allow audits or investigations to determine was there a fair election there. It doesn't matter what your party is. Too many people don't believe that there's integrity in the system. And it starts with the Secretary of State ensuring that there's integrity in the voting rolls. Making sure that what the poll workers are taught is actually executed on election day. Making sure that there's fair and honest counting of the ballots. And making sure that there's plenty of audits and investigations so that if an outside agency tries to tamper with our voting machines, that they are going to be caught. Why do we have so much concern about Russia hacking? Because the state of California, like so many states, has the lowest level of encryption when it comes to securing our databases. We do not secure our voter databases like your bank secures your money or your doctor secures your medical records. That's why we have problems That's why people are talking about that. So my name is Mark Meuser. I'm running to be your next Secretary of State. And on November 6th, I ask that you vote for me, Mark Meuser, to be your next Chief Election Officer.
Great. Just a question. So understanding the importance of accurate record keeping and the integrity of voter rolls, like you mentioned, but what can be done to further enfranchise the homeless population if they don't have a fixed address, or is the right to vote conditional on home ownership and apartment renting?
California law is actually very clear that the homeless can claim a intersection closest to where they reside. They've already settled that there are certain homes that people can actually claim as their residence, this is an issue that has been taken care of. They're always trying to tweak it. There was an attempt 2 years ago by the legislature to add even more clarity. Yes, there does need to be a little bit more clarity on the situation, but the law already provides. What really needs to happen is the Secretary of State and the Register of Voters actually needs to maintain the job and enforce it so that those people, you just don't have crazy voter registrations.
Great. And just a follow-up. Can you explain what the difference is between registering an intersection and a P.O. box, or a golf course, or the other places you mentioned?
You do not reside in a storage facility. You do not reside inside a P.O. box. You have to list your residence because, we do a census to know how many people live in each district, how to divide up the districts. So people who have a home, people who rent, it's real easy to figure out where your residence is. If you have a trailer, the law actually provides that you can actually register at a mobile home park. Or if you have a yacht and you're going to reside, you can claim the marina as your home. A homeless person is to basically choose an intersection and say that that is where I reside, and then they can have their mail forwarded to a P.O. box or to a relative or whatever. But you have to choose a residence, and a commercial building by law cannot be your residence. A motel cannot be your residence. The law basically says that you have to have an intent to live there permanently. So there have been cases right here in LA County where a person claimed that they resided under a particular tree in a certain park. And they were able to prevail on that because that's where they'd lived, that's where they intended to live. But a commercial building is not going to be your residence because you do not live inside that commercial building. That building has been zoned for commercial purposes. A hotel, you're only allowed to live there for 30 days. Yes, you can continue to renew on 30-day basis, but you can never have an intent that is your permanent dwelling because by law you cannot have more than a 30-day rental. Does that make sense?
Mark, with the motor voter registration situation, we've now learned that many people have registered to vote who are not even citizens. How do you take care of that if you get elected?
Let's start with the DMV real quick. 2 years ago, when the legislature proposed DMV motor voter, the DMV said, we are not able to handle this. Our systems are not capable of handling this. We're stretched too far. But the legislature went ahead and passed it. But it wasn't supposed to take place until next year. But what ended up happening is the Secretary of State, who was so concerned about having something that he could stick in his cap and say, look at all these new people that I've got registered to vote, signed a consent decree with the courts and forced the DMV motor voter on us in the middle of the election season. And DMV, up to their words, were not ready to handle it. We've had 78,000 duplicate voter registrations, 23,000 people registered to vote with bad information, 3,000 people registered to vote who didn't want to be registered to vote, and then 1,500 non-citizens were put on the voting rolls. What can I do as Secretary of State? It's called voter database management. Earlier this year, there was a Supreme Court case on the Secretary of State's duties to maintain the voter rolls. And in that, the state of California filed a brief and said, here are 11 different databases that you can use to maintain your databases. And we know that the state of California is only using 3 of them. We're not comparing our voter rolls with the Social Security death records. We're not comparing our voter rolls with Department of Homeland Security data. We're not comparing our voter rolls with DMV records on whether somebody has a green card paperwork or not. We're not comparing our voter rolls with AB60 driver's license, which are people who are not citizens, undocumented. We're just not doing the job that we know we can do. And it's just a matter of doing the job because they know what to do. It's just a matter of doing it.
I have a question. What is the future of electronic voting from your perspective? And is it legal currently in California? We have a big debate in our neighborhood council endlessly about whether or not you can cast votes for office online.
In the state of California, you must have a paper ballot that can be viewed by the voters. It's called a voter verified ballot. Los Angeles County community does have some form of voting online, and I don't know what it is, but it has nothing to do with what the state does. So that's why you may hear that debate. There is something that's done in the LA communities that does allow people to vote online, but it has nothing to do with your governor's race, your US Senate race, your congressional races, judges, assembly, or senators. So when people are talking about that in Los Angeles County, they're talking about this LA community, and unfortunately I can't remember what it is, but I do know that it exists out there. What is the future of electronic voting? There are a lot of people who are terrified of electronic voting, and they should be, because we're not using the highest level of encryption. If we actually move to highest level of encryption like our bankers or doctors use, we could probably move to it. Unfortunately, governments are cheap. They don't like to spend money. And so that is, until you knew that everybody was willing to do it at the highest level and hire IT techs that could actually properly do it, people are always going to be concerned. It was like 16 years ago, they were starting to move to electronic voting, and everybody was buying these new machines. And the horror stories that were coming out just really scared the nation, to the point where I think we have to be probably a generation or two before you're going to see it. Even though you have a generation coming into the world that doesn't understand why we have paper ballots, the thing is there are so many people who just do not trust computers. And there's a good reason not to trust computers when your government is not going to pay for the highest level of encryption and make sure you have the people on staff who can thwart the kind of attacks that you can have in your voting system. Can it be done? Yes. There are countries right now in the world that are doing internet voting, and they've set up some pretty decent securities to make it happen. But elections in California, elections in the United States, it's going to be a while before you get people willing to trust their vote, because that is what your government is. Your representative government comes from this. And we already have enough controversy, like here in LA County. They just awarded a contract so that George Soros' business partner is going to start counting LA County's votes. And there are plenty of people out there who are concerned now from the right. Wait a second, George Soros' business partner owns a company that's counting LA County's votes? With special interest, foreign country interests, the more the stuff that's done electronically, the more there are ways to attack it. And that's why there are many people who just say, just give me an old-fashioned paper ballot and let's count them by hand. So I don't know if I necessarily answered your question, but I gave you a lot more background.
Appreciate it. And just any other questions from the crowd? Yeah, Jeff?
I voted most of my time in Pennsylvania and New York. When I first came here to vote, I was shocked to see the tab thing where you flip you hit the button, or you put the pen.
Yes.
In,
the Chad ballots.
Whatever, yeah. I couldn't believe it. But how much would, in New York, and I used to do this, on election night, you'd have the old-fashioned voting booths that closed the curtain, You flip every line if you want, or you can, if you change your mind, you flip it back up and go to the other person. And when you open the curtain, it registers. Okay? At the end of the night, they have a Democrat, a Republican, and an independent go around to the back of every machine and record the numbers. Then they put a secure lock on it, or I forget how we did it, and they send them all down to the Board of Elections in trucks.
Yep.
You know, it's very hard to hack that.
Actually, it was a lot easier to hack it than you thought.
Well, I know some districts where it happened, but
Yeah.
I mean, is that just reminiscing of the good old days, or?
No, but what I will,
Wouldn't that be safer than?
as an election law attorney, I can tell you about election fraud going clear back to 1740.
Well, yeah.
I study this stuff, and it doesn't. We could have fun talking about elections in California in 1853. I got a humdinger of a story that would just cause everybody.
Appreciate that, exactly.
But what I'm saying there is, those machines were just as hackable, if not more hackable, than today's technology-driven machines, and every system out there is really only as good as the people. And one of the things that was nice about the New York system is that you would have a Republican and Democrat in the room all day, but the problem is those machines were hacked by the technicians who set up the machines and stuff like that, and there's stuff that they could do that just we don't need to go into. But the thing is, you want your Secretary of State as the chief election officer to believe that there are going to be people or parties or special interests that will try to cheat if they can. And so you want a vigilant Secretary of State who's going to be monitoring and trying to suppress any such efforts like that. And the current Secretary of State, he basically says it's non-existent, which means it's like your sheriff sitting in the donut shop saying nobody's sped today because I didn't see him.
Can I ask one more? Pennsylvania and New York always had voter identification cards. Nobody was offended, you know, it was no big deal. You carried it in your wallet, came in, it looked, signed, boom. Is that so, again, offensive to so many people that it's, I mean, so at least you know the person's registered and it's the person, probably.
I get asked that a lot, and I remind people, I'm running for Secretary of State, the chief election officer. I don't make the law, I simply enforce the law. That's going to need to be done by your assemblyman or your congressman. So my job is to enforce the law, not to make it.
Just one final question. Thank you so much for coming up to Studio City and sharing your time with us. The numbers that you cited where votes slipped through from P.O. boxes,
yeah.
But did they actually slip through, or can we at least celebrate that they were caught, and that's why we can state those numbers?
No, we can't celebrate they're caught because these numbers have been presented to the Secretary of State, and the Secretary of State has done nothing. These people are still on the voter roll.
Oh, so these are not officially, this is an alleged...
This is just what I'm seeing by doing my investigations,
okay,
stuff that something needs to be done with. And all these examples that I've cited, from 75 people, you know, all the way down to 31 or 12 or 10, and all these things, there have been organizations for years putting this on the Secretary of State's desk saying, hey, here's another example. And the Secretary of State has basically done nothing about it. And so for the last month, I've been making sure that people know that the current Secretary of State is incompetent and refusing to do the job that we, the people, have hired him to do. And that's why I'm asking for their vote on November 6th.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
Oh, are they incompetent, or is it a deliberate effort to allow other people to vote?
You can draw your own conclusion. They're at least incompetent, and if you want to assign them a higher level of fraud, that's up to you. Boy, I struck a nerve. They just keep on asking questions, don't they?
I do one more.
Very brief, Jeff, sure.
That's all right. I was just going to say, I worked for a guy, the first guy that ran against Frank Rizzo in Philadelphia. And we had, his name was Thatcher Longstreth. So, you know, what kind of, he could have won. But anyway, we got a call from South Philly that there was something going on. Two of us went down, we were on the law committee, and we knocked, it was in a row house, knocked on the door, and some guy came to the door, filled the door. It was like Rocky, you know. And you could see the people writing inside, just filling out ballots, you know. We said, we heard there's a little problem here. He says, no problem. Go over to Pat's and have a cheesesteak. So we just went back up to the hotel uptown and said, that district is going to resign.
Yeah.
So obviously.
Well, we've all heard the story about Box 13 in Texas for the LBJ election. You know, the Box 13 stories exist in almost every single state, almost every single decade. I can give you more Box 13 stories than you could care to count. That's why it's important to have a Secretary of State who's actually going to be fighting for the integrity of the elections. But here's the deal. Bernie Sanders' very first election, he won by 10 votes when he ran for mayor. He won by 10 votes. I may have given you a whole lot of statistics, but your vote does matter. And you're getting your friends and your family to get out and vote matters. Everyone here probably knows about 200 people in their sphere of influence. 100 are not even registered to vote. 50 are registered to vote but will not be voting because they don't want to take the time to study who to vote for because their vote does not matter. You need to get your friends and family out to the polls because, you know, there's, especially these judges here, nobody knows. I'm an attorney. I don't know half the judges on the ballot. I doubt they know half the judges on the ballot. But your vote does matter. Those races are going to come down to just a handful of votes. And as you can see, Bernie Sanders won by 10 votes. He almost became the Democrat candidate for president of the United States. Would that have happened if 10 votes had swung 50 years ago differently? Your vote matters, and it has a lasting impact on this nation. So on November 6th, please vote, and make sure your friends and your family vote. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Moving on to our state Senate candidate from, it's the 18th Senate District. We have Mr. Rudy Melendez, known to some of us in Studio City, and here he is. And here comes Roxanne Beckford Hoge, who will be joining us in a minute. Hey, I just want to get. Okay, so Mr. Melendez, go for it. Yes, you can sit down if you're comfortable. And yep,
Good evening, everyone. I know a handful of you. So it's nice to see a familiar face, friendly face. My name is Rudy Melendez, and I'm your candidate for California State Senate in the 18th District. Thanks to voters like you, we are advancing our socially progressive, fiscally conservative grassroots campaign to the general election in November. And for those that voted for me, thank you very much. And if you're considering to vote for me, I really appreciate it. I just want to take a few minutes to introduce myself. My wife and I live here in Studio City. We're California natives. I think we understand what's important to California. That's good paying jobs, economic prosperity, and environmental stewardship. That's the tenet of our campaign. I'm also a tax fighter, and our message is that we're going to bring accountability back to the San Fernando Valley. The 18th District is very diverse, and right now we have a lack of leadership at every level of government, quite frankly. We have dirty streets, dirty bus stops, clogged storm drains, our freeways are blighted in litter, garbage, and trash. That's the first thing that we're going to do when we get elected. We're going to hold every level of government accountable to get this community cleaned up. You may not see it so much here in Studio City, but when you go north and northeast into Panorama City, Pacoima, Mission Hills, North Hills, Arleta, that area is not being taken care of, and it's been neglected for many, many years. And it's really important to me personally. I'm a tree-loving Republican, and that's our intention. We don't think that we're getting the services that we're paying taxes for. I just want to talk a little bit about what we're advocating for. We hope that you will vote yes on 6 to repeal the gas tax, and that you'll vote no on Measure W. The county is spending taxpayer money advocating to clean stormwater, and I get it. I want to have clean air and clean water too, but they can't keep the storm drains clean. How are they going to keep the storm water clean? I'm happy to answer any questions if you have them. And I just wanted to sort of share with you, I've been on 2 neighborhood councils. Back in 2011, I got elected to the Greater Griffith Park Neighborhood Council. I ran unopposed, so we got in there with just a handful of votes. And about 6 months later, my wife and I moved into the Studio City area. And in 2015, I think it was, I applied to an open board seat. I got appointed to here in the Studio City Neighborhood Council. I was not reelected in 2016. We had Eric, and I know many of you are familiar, we had a very contentious election. It involved electronic balloting and so forth. And I learned from it. I could have done a better job. And I've also worked with Barry here on the Transportation Committee. I'm a cyclist. You know, we support multi-modes of transportation. We live in a unique area here with the LA County Flood Control Channel. We want to see that opened up to multi-modes of transportation. We need bike, pedestrian, equestrian paths. We need pocket parks. We need public bathrooms. And the county's moving way too slow in building that out. I know not everybody supports cycling and complete streets and road diets, and I understand that. There are like 7 million cars registered in LA County, but if we have an opportunity or a place where we could put cyclists, take them off the roads and give them a safe place to commute, exercise, recreate, and move to their, you know, from home to work along the flood control channel, the Tonga Wash, the LA Flood Control Channel, all these interconnected flood control channels that have not had any major infrastructure improvements in 70 years. And I don't know what the county's doing. They talk about it, they have the diagrams, and they suggest they're gonna do things. It takes them 10 years to do 1 mile, and it costs $10 million. That's not good enough. Good enough is not good enough. I've learned a lot in this election cycle. We've gone to many neighborhood councils and we talked to stakeholders and asked them what's important to them. I want to go back and say that 18th district is very diverse. Depending on where you go, the issues really are very different. Some communities don't want street vending. They just want responsive government. They want the delivery of basic services that they're not getting right now. And we've heard a lot of elected officials make a lot of promises about holding DWP accountable and DWP reform, and our utility bills are going up. I know some of you are probably on next door. Hi, Roxanne, you want to come up here? Roxanne Hoge.
Rudy's being joined by Roxanne Beckford Hoge, who's running for the state assembly seat in the area,
yes.
Correct?
And I'll just introduce myself as well. You said 6:30, I was on the dot. I have 4 children, that's by way of explaining the late arrival. They like to eat, crazy kids, so I had to feed them. I'm from Jamaica originally. He's a tree-hugging Republican. I'm an immigrant Republican of color. Not that that matters, but it's slightly interesting. I am running for assembly, which, for anyone who doesn't know, is like the Congress of the state. So when people go, what do you put together? There's no putting together. They're actually just tearing stuff asunder. I have lived, since I moved to California, which I did as soon as I could. Like I said, when you emigrate from Jamaica, you either go to Miami or to Canada. And thankfully, my family chose the warmer option. And so we lived in Miami for a while. And then I came here in the late 80s. And ever since my husband and I got married, we started in what now is this district. At the time it wasn't, but in the Hollywood Hills. And then each child we have to move a little bit further north to be able to afford to live here. I think other people have had that experience. And now why I'm running is that one of my children is an adult who is in his junior year of college. And when I said, you know, we're not going to be subsidizing your life after graduation, he realized that he would have to look at other states to move to. And that's pretty sad. I think a lot of us either know people who've moved out of California because of the complete lack of affordability, or have considered it. My husband's considered it, and that's how I was able to convince him that running was a good idea for our family, because I said, let's try and fix where we are, because I love it here. I mean, California is, as you said, incredibly diverse, incredibly full of, people and natural resources and topography that's completely varied, and I really don't want to go anywhere where there's humidity or bugs anymore. So the platform I'm running on is that of basic common sense, which is sadly very uncommon. I find it ridiculous that we should be spending hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars coddling people with substance abuse issues who have no interest or desire to clean themselves up. And at the same time, we were just at a forum yesterday with our disabled community, people who, their healthcare aides haven't gotten a cost of living increase since 2011, was it they said, which is unbelievable, that they, can't ride public transit, again, because our law enforcement doesn't enforce the law, that housing is so unaffordable because we have no inventory, because we've made it impossible for anyone to build, not just evil developers, but, citizens if you want to improve your own property. So I would just like to return to what our founders intended, which was people, citizens, who serve in legislatures and city councils, and like you do in the thank God for the neighborhood councils, but they serve and then they return to private life. So they have to live with the consequences of whatever they've passed, and also so they understand there's not this sort of two-tier, one for thee and one for me. That's what kind of defines a third world country. Like, we had it pretty good in Jamaica, but there were a vast majority of people didn't. And that's what always happens when you set up a two-tier system where the rule of law isn't for everyone. So I am so impressed to find all of you out here on a Friday night. We are all total geeks, and that's a good thing, because we don't have rule by the majority. We have rule by the majority who participate. So thank you all for participating.
Thank you. Very nice.
Oh, and we're done. I guess.
I wonder what happened.
Yeah.
Well, I think I can still ask my question in the dark.
Yes, you can. I can.
Thank you for your comment about the cost of building. I think it was the other night we had a meeting here, and I mentioned the cost for me to remodel my house, that the city was going to charge me $4,000 for schools as part of my permit, $3,000 to apply for a permit, and $1,300 if they granted the permit. So there's something wrong.
Really wrong.
And, that may go back to Prop 13 and how do we fund government, but I think they have enough money already. I don't know where all this money is going, but now I'll get to the question I stood up for. There is a big move to house the homeless. And all the homeless people I know are on drugs, who have no desire to live in a house. And I don't understand why we don't try to give them some mental or drug abuse help. I'm sorry for Mr. Reagan's removal of subsidies to the mental health facilities and dumping all these people onto the street, and that was 40 years ago maybe. But this situation has continued, and then with our drug epidemic, it's gotten even worse. But I think our government is looking in the wrong direction as to just putting people in a house and thinking it's going to solve the problem. Most of these people will destroy the house and not live there. Somebody who was at that meeting the other night mentioned that they didn't know of a single person who didn't want a roof over their heads. And my experience is just the opposite. So love to hear your opinions.
I would say that both of us probably, we'll have different approaches. The first thing to say is that a lot of the problem we all can see with our own eyes, and that's what makes us crazy, is because every forum and town hall that the city council puts on, they go, these people are just like you and me. They're just one paycheck. And I'm like, you know what? I've missed a couple paychecks, and I've never gone to the toilet in a public park. I just, no matter how bad things got. So we can all see what the police officers on the street all see, which is that 90% of what we're talking about is not traditional homelessness. We're not talking about someone who had a medical issue or bankruptcy, and now they can't pay their rent and they're evicted. There's beds for, and there's many, many groups that do great work for that. If it's a matter of affordability, people would do as we did and keep moving further north, like keep moving to where you can't afford, because we don't just get, we all can't live in Beverly Hills. But the other thing is that you're right, substance abuse and mental illness makes, it's not a home issue. It's not a homeless issue. So we have to use the right words. What we're dealing with right now is an epidemic of criminal vagrancy. And there's a lot of fathers to it, and so whatever happened with Ronald Reagan and the mental health institutions, and by the way, the ACLU saying you can't house people 40 years ago, doesn't explain why all of a sudden 2 years ago, I mean, I used to know, we all knew each person who was sort of had a quadrant here in Studio City, and that was like their turf, and they were, you know, that's always going to be part of the landscape. And now all of a sudden, California has a quarter of the nation's homeless in like 2 years. I've got articles over there I wrote on housing affordability, because it is not an affordability issue, although affordability is a huge issue and those fees are crazy. But the fact remains that you always have to follow the money. And we are so generous as Californians that HHH and H money now adds up to a bucket of $2.5 billion with a B dollars that can only be spent on homeless services. And so there's a bit of a, hey, now we have the money, we don't really want to solve the problem because now we have all these people, we can keep getting the money. So it becomes this vicious cycle. So on the back of that article is a link to a great article by someone about the $1 billion homeless scam, and where is all this money going and what is it for? And you know, the officers I talked to, who are again not represented by their leadership, who Michael Moore said it's going to take us a decade or more to clean up the housing, the homeless problem, which didn't happen in New York when they did broken windows policing. You clean it up pretty quickly. You just say it's not a crime to be homeless, but it is a crime to take a dump on somebody's lawn. Like, and that, sorry for the language. But you have to attack it from all prongs. So the cops on the street say to me they're spending the bulk of their time with criminal vagrants, and they know, for example, a woman who lives in Weddington who has a Section 8 apartment in Culver City. Culver City, I'd go there. She won't go. State's paying for it. It's empty. She won't go. So it's not an issue of housing. The budget is not an issue of revenue. It's an issue of spending. I don't want to take, you know, I want your perspective too, but there's so much to unpack there. Those fees are horrendous.
Well, I just wanted to add that homelessness is obviously a very vexing problem. We know we hear that term a lot. I don't have all the answers, but we've gone to a lot of homeless town hall meetings. Krikorian had one last year that we attended. We've been to some of the other neighborhood council town halls that they've hosted, and we listen to the homeless professionals and hear what they have to say. And basically, my perspective is that the city essentially is operating in fear of lawsuits when they deal with the homeless. You know, homeless have constitutional rights. You can't just remove them off the street. A lot of it is, I think, foot dragging with public work agencies and cleaning up after the homeless, whether it's personal property, trash, rubbish, or you know, war medals. And so, you know, they take very measured steps when they remove a homeless encampment. I personally think, and this isn't very politically safe to say, but I think we need to be tougher. We need some tougher love dealing with the homeless. But yeah, so you have to balance the rights of the homeless with the rights of the community. I think what the audience member suggested was a lot of the examples he's seen. There are certainly people that don't want the help. And we all remember we raised taxes at the county with Measure H for services. The city had HHH for affordable housing. I've been to some homeless permanent supportive housing locations. If you're familiar with an extension of the housing unit downtown called Piece by Piece LA. It's kind of an arts collective. They have a gallery space. There was a $40 million project. It holds about 100 people at permanent supportive housing. The county has an office downstairs where they offer services, and then upstairs the residents can make mosaic art and sell their work and find some dignity. I think it's a wonderful program. We need more things like that, but obviously, as you know, it's very expensive. It was a lot of private entities coming together to build this facility. Yeah, I mean, it's a tough problem. Like I said, I don't have all the answers. My goal is to listen and better understand so we can deal with it and take it on, head on. Personally, as a steward of the environment, I think public work agencies need to come in and do a better job cleaning up after the homeless encampments and not allow them to languish. I think that would be helpful. It's not the answer. And then, of course, we have to coax those that don't want the help to come get the services, because they are there. And my understanding, the state has additional money too that's tied up in lawsuits. So, anyhow, that's my perspective.
There is one thing that, just as a state perspective, that caused the problem, that as members of the legislature, so Rudy's running for state senate and I'm running for state assembly, Prop 47 and 57, we all, as I said, voted on, because we're kind-hearted people as well, and 47 was called Safe Neighborhoods and Schools Act. And that decriminalized, reduced from felonies into misdemeanors, a ton of stuff, including rape of an unconscious person, which I kind of feel is felonious, but that's just me. And then we let people out of jail for what we were promised would be nonviolent offenses, which also included sex attackers. And then the person he's running against championed the removal of bail, of cash bail, which is actually in the Constitution, it's an amendment. And then 1810 is going to let people get out of their felonies if they can say that they had a mental issue. So if they were depressed and that's why they then went and murdered or whatever. So there's been an effort on the part of the legislature out of Sacramento, forgetting for a second all that our councilmen have to do with the homelessness issue, of rewarding criminality and opening floodgates of, I mean, Rudy, that place sounds great for $40 million for 100 people, but I choose to not drink to excess, and I'm wondering if maybe I should take it up so that I can get a nicer establishment to live in, because it doesn't make sense. It does make sense to help people who really need help and who want help, but it doesn't make sense to reward people for incredibly bad, self-destructive, it's not good for them either, by the way, self-destructive behavior. And then, as you all saw, if anyone went to did you go to the RIU forum, homeless forum, that people started getting a little antsy at, in Notre Dame, and to say, we're gonna put supportive housing here and nobody has to stop using or be clean. We just want them to have a home right next to your school or your place of business. And that's insanity to me.
While I was sitting here, I remembered that for the last year and a half, I've been helping a woman who suffered an assault that near killed her. And she had spent a year in the hospital recovering. And then, thank goodness, by the eventual graciousness of the city, she was put in a Motel 6 because it was physically unsafe for her to be in a shelter. She said it's more dangerous than living on the street. And so I think there are some cases we just need to be cautious of who we put in a box of homeless, that there are some people who are true victims and do need help. And this woman is trying to get back on her feet and get a place where then she can have a residence and then get some work. But she had a broken collarbone, a broken leg, her head busted open and a steel plate put in her head from they tried to run her head through a wall after they couldn't rape her. So, it was a very brutal thing, and I'm honored to help her. But
thank you.
Hi. There's always been a debate in this country about the rights of an individual versus the obligations of the society as a whole. And so I know we're talking a lot about tough love for the homeless. We're talking a lot about stopping coddling for the homeless. And so I'm just wondering, beyond just constitutional rights, these people are also, you'd be representing them if you were elected. They'd be your constituents. They'd be your neighbors. And so I'm just wondering that between those two things, if what you're really saying, if you're elected, your pledge to these constituents is to leave them alone and to ignore it. Or what is the solution?
That's not what I'm saying.
Great.
I don't think that's
if you could
what I'm
elaborate,
saying.
please.
Well, Brian, like I said, I don't have all the answers. We were learning about the issue. I think you have transitional housing, you have permanent supportive housing. Some people don't want that. They want to be out on the street. So I'm not saying leave them alone. I'm just saying let's clean up after them. Okay, let's have public work agencies come in. Homeless people need basic city services too. They need somebody to come pick up their trash. They need a restroom to use. Allowing them to go to the bathroom. I know, look, Los Angeles doesn't have enough public restrooms. That's pretty obvious. I mean, everyone's probably rushed to Starbucks to go to the bathroom in traffic once or twice. I've done it myself, but I'm not saying we just leave them alone. If you listen to the homeless professionals, those that don't want help, you have to coax them in to get services. It's not just one trip, it's many trips. And what Roxanne was talking about earlier is our local law enforcement, the statistics that I've heard from our lead officer, 8 out of 10 calls now are dealing with the homeless. Police didn't sign up to be social workers. They want to fight crime. Something else that Roxanne talked about, our opponent with this bail reform and all this criminal justice reform legislation, 109, 4757, have not been good for California. So that, I think, has contributed to the homeless population. Clearly, it's obvious. I don't think anyone really wants to admit that, but that's, we got the new numbers this year. They did the count in January. It took them 5 months to process and tabulate it. They said it went down, but it went up in the valley, and it went up on the west side. I don't think things are really improving. We voted for these measures in 2016, and I haven't seen any outreach teams come into North Hollywood. I saw one group downtown a couple of months ago. I was having lunch with my wife who works downtown, and I actually did see a homeless outreach team. And I know they're there, but there's not enough of them. And if they have the money, we need to see them out there doing the outreach. That's not happening. I don't know if anyone out there in the audience has seen these outreach teams come from the county, but I personally have only seen one outreach group in 2 years since we passed the measure.
Ryan, do you have kids? No. Okay, so I have 4. You can have a spare anytime you want. I'll answer you by saying this. So I love my children. They're going to be lovely people at some point, all of them. Right now, a couple of them are teenagers. When they are nasty, recalcitrant, and God forbid, if they were to start using drugs, like, in my home, all that love would not amount to me coddling them, because that's called enabling, and that would help destroy their lives. They already would be trying to destroy their lives, but they would go even further. And I think we're all nice people. I mean, this is what happens, Studio City in the Valley. It's such a nice little like Mayberry feel, but you have to make priorities. And in the Torah, I think it says, if you're kind to the cruel, you'll be cruel to the kind. And you cannot say the biggest priority is it's a subset of people, and again, let's take aside for a second someone who's been attacked like your friend, sir, or someone who has lost their home, or, okay, let's take aside that 10% for a second, even 20, whatever it is. Whatever number of people are choosing to abuse drugs and alcohol and live on the street and defecate on the street and pitch tents where handicapped people can't get by on the sidewalk, and just have burgeoning possessions and stuff, so that we now have typhus and hepatitis A. I mean, I'm from a third world country. I never thought I would see it here. If we're going to put those needs of people to be that free above the people who've scraped and gathered to have a home or a business in wherever it is, Studio City, like I said, I kept having to move north. I'm like, please stop with the kids, because we're like north of Oxnard now. But the fact is that you have to make choices, and it's not good for those people either to keep coddling. So back in the early 80s, late 70s, New York was a real cesspool. It's when my husband chose to come here. I mean, you'd get mugged on every corner. Garbage was piled totally high. And liberal and blue though it was, they voted for Rudy Giuliani and to clean up the mess. And he hired Bill Bratton as the police chief. Chief of police. And they did something called broken windows policing. And the theory is, and it makes sense in your house, in your neighborhood, if you allow sort of crap to fester and you allow people to get away with little things, little things become big things. So the approach has to be a little bit tough on the little things, because it's not going to be good for any of us. Now, as to whether, yes, people are your constituents if they're in a physical area, but I have a real problem when I keep hearing, again, from very kind-hearted people about how someone who pulled the RV in front of my house that is inoperable and they're like running a small prostitution ring out of there, they're my neighbor too. They're not being very neighborly to me when they dump out the waste at the end of the night. And we can't do anything about it because you call the police and everything's become nothing, and then it would take them half a day to do anything, so they can't. It's making an inhospitable and uncivilized place for all of us. And then what'll happen is what's already happening. All the producers and those who can afford to go will go, and then there'll be no money for the services for the people we thought we wanted to help. I'm sorry, I know you got to follow up because you're like, oh no, she's wrong. Go.
No, I just really quick. I'm sorry. I'm glad you brought up the typhus. I'm glad you brought up for handicap accessibility. It just because even if we don't want to help them directly because it is coddling, because we want to do the tough love.
No, I want to help, but I want to help them get clean.
No, absolutely. I'm just saying, like, to acknowledge that this does have a ripple effect. And it then does become about public safety. It does become about public health. It does become about all of these other things. And to help them would be to helping the society as a whole.
Right.
And
the question is what form
that.
does that help take?
Right. Exactly. But yeah, I do feel like if everything was equal, if everything was in isolation, I would completely agree with you. But as this stuff does ripple out, that's where I think we have a disagreement.
Right. And I think my way is better because I think at the end of the day, when civilization breaks down, like if you've ever lived in a country with garbage strewn all over its street, which, I mean, when I came to America, I'll never forget going to Disney World for the first time because we're in Florida, and I was 11. And I looked out the window and I said to my stepfather, where's all the garbage? Like, what do you Americans do with your garbage? And he said to me, Rox, here in America, you'll get a ticket for littering. And I went, oh, that's crazy. But guess what's happened? We will now get tickets for littering, but the guy with the RV parked outside my house, he can litter all he wants because everybody's afraid of the Jones Amendment and all this stuff. So I think you have to have a rule of law for everybody. Yes, sir.
Sort of dovetailing on that conversation, I attended the candlelight vigil on Sepulveda and Ventura a while back, which was a bunch of people came out to support the housing they want to build in Sherman Oaks. And I met a homeless gentleman there. And what was interesting was he said that the problem is that you can't coddle those people. He's talking about himself. And it took him owning up to the fact that he had a problem. And he said that's maybe not the case with everybody, but that's a good part of it where you have to accept responsibility for your actions. And until you do that first step, you're not going to clean up your life. The other thing I wanted to bring up is on January 18th, I attended the Councilman Krikorian's town hall on homelessness. And there were a couple things that stuck out to me. So the councilman was stating that housing would cost is costing between $400,000 and $600,000 per unit. And he goes, but not all the money is coming from us. It's state money too, as if state money isn't our money. Then he handed it over, I'm just shortening it, then he handed it over to Meg Barkley, who's the person overseeing, I guess, all the finances for HHH. And she went on to describe that HHH will cover up to $220,000 per unit, and they hope to get the money from other sources like No Place Like Home. So I went home, and I did video it, and a couple months later, I watched the video back, and what is No Place Like Home? So I look it up, and I find out, well, that's a $2 billion, not 1.2 like HHH. It's $2 billion that's borrowed from Prop 63 money, which I don't know if you can, I guess you can't, because it was actually in the courts at the time, and she neglected to mention any of that. So I'm looking for clarity on Prop 2, all these things. So Meg, because I recorded it, I actually have a transcript, and mental illness was not mentioned more than 3 times in the entire piece. Okay, but now she bundled money coming from No Place Like Home, which is turned into Prop 2, which is supposed to be money to build housing for the mentally ill. What's the truth here? Is this just another slush fund? And it looks like Prop 1 is the same thing. And
read the article, The $1 Billion Homeless Scam, on the back of my thing. I think what's been so illuminating in this, because I'm not a politician, you know, as I said, I'm a mom, I had a business, I'm an actor, you've worked in the business too.
Also, may I just interrupt for one second? We answer the question, and then let's each take a minute to kind of wrap it up, and then we're going to move on to that. But it's been great, and we appreciate your time.
And we'll come back next Friday.
Of course. And perhaps, if this is an appropriate time to mention, to extend yet another invitation to the folks you are challenging, who are on the ballot and live in this town and are happy to...
He says he's coming next Friday.
Oh, that's fantastic.
He is, yes. So I wrote Mr. Nazarian myself, and I said, dude, come on.
That's great.
And he said, all right, I'll be there.
Okay, then we can, let's proceed. And good question. You want to answer? And then
so the 30,000-foot view is that I think most of us probably naively, like I did, go, well, I learned about America, like I came to America, and I learned about, you know, civics and people represent, and they go, and running, I'm discovering something different, which is that it's all about the money in a horrifying way. And not just money like, hey, you're richer than I, you know, like, can you have friends who do? No, I'm talking about crazy, big, not in our realm of understanding money. And they even, when I went to a public policy, you know, session, candidate training, I learned about the legislative branch, the judicial branch, and the executive branch when I went to school, right? Guess what they call the power in Sacramento? The third house. I was like, the third? We have Senate, Assembly, what? It's lobbyists. They own all of them. It's unbelievable to me. All the money, it's like that 3-card Monte on the streets of New York. I mean, to try and get your head around it is almost impossible, which is, by the way, why the people we're challenging, they don't get it either, and it's no slight to them. How the legislature works is they put through, in the last 2 weeks, I believe, of session in the Assembly this year, 4,000 bills. Who can read that? I mean, I'm sort of an Evelyn Wood speed reader myself, but that's insane. And so they just literally get things handed to them. Here's your signature. They'll be talking on the floor against something, and then someone will say, no, you're for it. And then they kind of go, yes, as I said, I'm for it. They have no idea. It's all buckets of money. The people who are getting the HHH and H money, there's one agency that's just been there at the trough. And so they'll wrap it up by saying, they claimed initially, none of these people are mentally ill or drug addicted. What are you talking about? And then you say, well, how'd you come up with the number that, you know, 80% of them aren't? They self-reported. Well, since the definition of family is a collection of all sorts, including, like, you always have an addict family member, we always have like a crazy one, you always got like a right winger and a left winger, that's what family is, right? So you know from the addicts in your family that if you ask them if they're addicted, the answer is no. So now that there's money associated with it, though, they'll change the definition to get what they want, which is money to have, and the big kahuna seems to be to get public sector employees hooks into something. So the gig isn't really about the housing. Building the housing is sort of a moneymaker for the developers and stuff. It's to get the SEIU and the public sector employee unions to get some of that sweet, sweet pension money. I don't know about you guys. I got a SAG pension. Like, I was an actor, like an actual actor with lines and everything. And my pension does not approach the 6 figures that people get for being the worst employees on the planet, right? If you've ever tried to get help at the DMV or at the assessor's office or anything, by and large, that's what public sector unions do. They protect mediocre workers. And we have a $200 to $300 billion unfunded pension liability that needs to get plugged. That's what this is all about.
One real question. For the mayor, as far as mentally ill, sorry, Rudy.
That's okay.
Tanaz from the mayor's office came to the neighborhood council and said 72 to 75% of the homeless are just like you and me. That was the quote.
That was a self-report.
Yeah.
Thank you, Peter. I do recall seeing you and Patricia and Heidi at the meeting. I thought it was the end of last year, but I guess it was the beginning of this year. And a lot of people that aren't here, candidates that didn't bother to show up tonight, weren't at that meeting either.
In mine, they can come back with answers next week, since we're running short on time, but mine is about pensions. How do we change the state pension system to be a 401k system for all new hirees? Because like you say, we're going to run out of money, and the percentage of our total state budget going towards pensions is growing every year. And that's why we're being asked for a gas tax, because taxes we've all been paying for centuries, we've thought paid to repair roads. Now they can't repair roads unless they get another tax to do it, what they should already be doing with the money we're already giving them. So I guess that's where I'm saying the current legislature is in this mode of anything new you want to do, and they think fixing roads is new even though it's been around for centuries. You know, how do we get out of that mindset with that majority in Sacramento to not think everything that's going to be fixed needs a new tax? And then, you know, to do that, we've got to reform pensions.
I'll just quickly respond, Eric. Thank you. Pension reform is like a taboo thing in California. The California Supreme Court, I think, has ruled that you can't touch it, but something has to be done. The law has to change, or at least for new hires. It's unsustainable. This is like the elephant in the room that nobody ever wants to talk about.
We do.
And just for clarity and transparency, I'm in a union. I'm in a privately funded union. I work in the Hollywood entertainment industry. I'm a union lighting technician. I have great health insurance, but we fund our own union. It's not a taxpayer-funded union.
And you want us to wrap up?
Yeah,
I would
very
say,
quickly. Thank
yes,
you.
very quickly.
And come back next week on November 2nd.
So I'm Roxanne Beckford Hoge. I have stuff over there, the article. I have a website. If you take the sheet, you'll find it. You'll also find a video that I made that's basically about, you know, what's going on here. And I think it's so important. A friend of mine's mother, she's from the South, she was, when in doubt, just throw the bums out. And how can we get pension reform? Because that's the only way. It should be, by the way, a constantly replenished. I don't want to go to Sacramento forever. 2 terms. Like, you know, you get to know it, you figure some stuff out, and then get out. I mean, that's the problem, is that people, all of a sudden, they go and they're like, well, look at this, look what's opened up to me. And we got to stop that. And that goes, by the way, from the top. John Cox gets the pension plug. He believes in zero-based budgeting, which only economic geeks are into, but it would be great.
Thank you, Eric. So my name is Rudy Melendez. Again, I'm your candidate for California State Senate in the 18th District. Thank you very much for having this candidate forum. We really appreciate it. Candidates like Roxanne and I don't get the media attention that we feel like we deserve. So thank you for being here. And just, I'm on hiatus this week, but I actually work next week. If I can make it back Friday, I will be here. I might not be at 6 o'clock. Yeah.
Has the senator agreed to come?
I don't know. He hasn't shown up at too many places.
Well, we'll ask him nicely.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Maybe you can engage him. Yeah.
Appreciate your time. Thank you both.
And I'm such a horrible politician. I was actually endorsed by the LA Daily News. I forgot to mention that.
Oh, okay.
I do have some handbills if anyone would like to take a sign. We just got those from the printer today, so thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you both. Okay, so now, without further delay, we're going to hear from our judges who have come from far and wide to address the Studio City folks, and we're looking forward to it. So we have, I can call you by name, or you can come up as I introduce you. We have, I believe, Tony Cho is in the house. Thank you. Tony Cho is running for, I just had the thing open to the page. He'll tell us exactly which district he's running for. You want to start by, yeah. You want to give us a short intro and then we can call up the next one? Would that be helpful? Or you want us everybody sit up at once? What do you think's best? Oh, yes. I'm sorry. Miss Sauceda has to leave. So let's let her kick it off. And it's Veronica Sauceda. And you can drop in and, yes. Sure. And Sydne Michel can go, okay. Sure. Actually, maybe we should all, why don't you sit it down as well?
Us, right?
Let's start with the first 2. Great.
Oh, okay.
And then Veronica followed by Sydne Michel. Okay, so take it away, Veronica.
Thank you. Good evening, and thank you very much for being here on a Friday night, and, you know, Dodgers are playing. So my name is Veronica Sauceda, and I'm running for office seat number 4. I'd like to tell you a little bit about myself and why I'm running. I currently sit as a Los Angeles Superior Court Commissioner at the Compton Courthouse. Prior to that, I was a nonprofit attorney for almost 14 years, and actually most of my services were out in San Fernando Valley for the first few years. And so I specialized in assisting victims of abuse in family law cases, most of my cases where folks were either physically abused, sexually abused, and I helped them with, we provided holistic services and provided them with assistance with their divorces, high conflict custody cases, child support, etc. After 14 years of being a practitioner, a lawyer, I applied to the Los Angeles Superior Court. I was vetted by judges, a panel of judges, and I was selected by judges based on my work ethic, my trial experience, and selected as a Los Angeles Superior Court Commissioner. And most people don't know what court commissioners do. We do exactly the same things that judges do. We're sort of junior judges. There are certain things that we're not able to do. For example, I can't preside over a felony jury trial. I can't sign off on search warrants, and I can't vote for the leadership of the court. So those are some of the things that I can't do as a commissioner. And obviously I can't supervise other judges like a supervising judge or a site judge. So those are the reasons why I'm running for Los Angeles Superior Court, one of many reasons actually. I've been rated well qualified by the LA County Bar Association, and the LA County Bar Association also vets, they vetted all of us actually, and that's also a thorough vetting. I was, again, rated well qualified. I have judicial experience, and I bring a unique perspective to the bench because you're going to meet most of our friends here who are running or come from a criminal law background. I came from a nonprofit background, and I understand the needs of the public, people that walk through my doors. I understand the challenges that they face, but I also have been, for the last 3 years, a commissioner, and I make fair and impartial decisions every day. And I'm no longer an advocate for one side or another. I'm the person who adjudicates cases that come before her, and I do that every day with integrity, fairness, and the appropriate judicial temperament. So that's just a little bit about myself.
Thank you.
Do you have a JD degree?
Absolutely, yes. I graduated. Before you can become a judge or a commissioner, you need to have at least 10 years of litigation experience. I went to UCLA undergrad and UCLA School of Law. I graduated and I ended up serving the public after law school. So yes, I have a JD degree. I practiced for 14 years, and now I'm on the bench as a commissioner.
Hi. Okay. I'm going to stand up. I just feel like it's a little easier for me. Hello, dedicated, educated voters, because you're missing the Dodger game. That's amazing that you're here. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you, Eric, for having us, your brother Joshua, who I just met. My name is Sydne Jane Michel. I'm going to try to be brief because my fellow candidates, I know, are all out here as well. Sydne Jane Michel. My title right now is I'm a senior deputy city prosecutor for the cities of Redondo Beach and Hermosa Beach. Those are two cities in the South Bay. I've been a criminal prosecutor for 13 years. I prosecute serious crimes, violent crimes. I've done a vehicular manslaughter case. I do sexual assault cases, various criminal cases. I'm unique among my peers, I think, because I'm the only person that also has a very extensive civil background as well. I was a partner at Kirkland & Ellis, which is a large civil law firm downtown, has offices in New York and Chicago and Germany and Washington, D.C. Ken Starr, the Whitewater investigator, was a partner when I was a partner there. I made partner there after 6 years, and there I did civil litigation and white-collar criminal defense, and I was there for 10 years. So I have spent 10 years in civil litigation and 13 years doing criminal prosecution. So given that I've done defense for 10 years and prosecution for 13 years, I think I bring balance to the bench. And I think I have a very large breadth of legal experience. In a way, you could put me in any courtroom and I could sort of hit the ground running. I graduated from UCLA and Loyola Law School with honors. I have been endorsed by the LA Times twice now. They endorsed me for the primary and now for the general election. I've been endorsed by the 3 labor unions. I'm proud to say I have 20 law enforcement endorsements. Steve Cooley, the former district attorney, has endorsed me. I have the Mexican American Bar Association, and many, many others. Feel free to go to my website. My cards are over there. My website is www.michel, M-I-C-H-E-L, forjudge.com. And it's, you know, we all see each other, and we're all running for judges, and we all have different backgrounds. So I encourage you to go to my website, ask any questions you have briefly. I'll take a couple questions, and I look forward to getting to know you all and having you go to my website. And thank you again for being here, and thanks for having us.
Great. This is a question for both of you, but also I'd love to hear the other judges' answer as well. But what do you find to be the biggest threat to equal justice under law?
Oh, that's a big question. Do you want to start?
Well, unethical lawyers, certainly. But I think the biggest problem we're having now in the criminal courts, I think, are the bail issues and the sentencing issues. There's no question that the bail system is broken, and there are efforts to fix it. And some of it works and some of it doesn't. And every day, most of us who are in court every day, have to make decisions about, how do I help this person? How do I help rehabilitate them? Is it just going to help to put him in jail, or should he receive, for example, my favorite diversion is military diversion. That's something I try to use as much as I can. People that have fought for our country and have come back from the war, and maybe they're having some anger issues, some substance abuse issues because they were in the war. How can we solve that problem so they don't reoffend? So what I'm seeing in the courts now as a threat are bail issues and sentencing issues, and I can go into much more detail, but that's off the top of my head.
Well, I'd like to echo part of what Sydne said. Bail reform is absolutely at the forefront. I know some of the judges that worked on the bail reform, and you know, it's not exactly what some of the judges envisioned. And so the judges that are on this committee, part of this committee, are working on how to enforce and what policies are going to, how are we going to measure who gets OR'd and who stays in jail. And so part of the discussion is, you know, their courts partner up with the probation department, and currently there's already a system in place, for example, on bail deviation. And so folks who would like a bail reduction get assessed a certain point on a point scale, 1 through 7, 7 through 14, 15 through 20. And the higher you go on that scale, the likelihood of you getting OR'd or bail reduction is pretty low. So folks, you know, look at their criminal history, whether they have an employment history, whether they have a home to go to, whether they have a support system. So these are the things that are being considered. So definitely bail reform is an issue. But I also think that, you know, the folks that walk in through the doors, most people don't have attorneys, and I think it's important to address self-represented litigants. And there are resources available, and we need to use those resources so that folks can better prepare themselves to come to court and appear before commissioners or judges. So those are the two that I see that are important, and we need to be better aware of these resources that are available to judges. And you know, again, we're no longer advocates, but we can provide information to court users.
Okay. I think that's.
Yeah,
they don't have any questions?
Yeah. Do we have any questions from the audience here, from Rudy?
Yes.
Thank you. About bail reform, and so just so everyone's clear, our opponent was the co-author of SB 10, and I'm wondering, what's the incentive for somebody to come back to show up in court if the bail industry goes away, and how do you envision the county paying for this new level of government bureaucracy that the bail industry has provided for the taxpayer?
Well, I'm not sure how it'll be paid for. We as judges, we don't legislate. We don't make the laws. What we do is apply the facts to the law and make decisions daily. And so my job is not to legislate from the bench. My job is to enforce and I know adjudicate cases. I know what the law is. I have to apply these facts. And so our job is a little bit different. We're not politicians. Yes, we are running for an elected position. It is a nonpartisan race. And, a lot of folks will ask us questions. We've been doing this for 9 months. And they'll ask us for, what is your position on this? And what is your position on that? And unfortunately, we can't answer those type of questions because what you want from us is to be fair and to be impartial. And all I can tell you is that we're going to apply the existing laws to the facts of each case, whether criminal, family, dependency, probate, etc.
Where did he go?
He's over there.
Yes, I agree. We have to be careful in terms of rendering opinions in case these issues come before us. But I will say the incentive to come back, theoretically, for example, if you have someone that's got a third-time DUI and the court sets no bail, but instead puts a scram bracelet on them so they can't drink and drive, or a ignition interlock device in their car so they can't get in their car and drive, theoretically the incentive would be to come back to court so that you get the scram bracelet off or you can remove the ignition interlock device. Also, that particular bill, and I'm not sure exactly how it'll work, is trying to fund a pretrial almost like a probation department, a pretrial department where people can go and be assessed, because what we're all looking for, most important, is public safety risk. If you let this person out without bail, is the victim in danger? Is the public in danger? So we are always looking, is there a less restrictive means to still assure public safety, yet not impose this arbitrary financial amount on someone? So it's broken, needs to be fixed. I don't believe that has been thought through, and it's going to put an awful lot of people out of business. But I do believe that there needs to be more discretion in setting bail, and that's already happening now with some recent case law. So, one more question. I'm trying to get out of here. I told him I had to leave. Did you tell him?
He's got a question, yes.
Yeah. And relating to the same subject, when I heard the proponents for that bill, they talked about how the bail system discriminates against the poor and minorities. And I was offended, because most minorities don't commit crimes and most poor people don't commit crimes. And the way this system is looking like it's going to be set up, most of these individuals that will be making the decision whether or not someone can be released pending trial are going to be political appointees, which kind of reminds me of a country where people don't have civil rights. So how, as a judge, are you going to be able to protect the civil rights of individuals who, like we just saw this week, with the City Council passing the motion that if you are affiliated or have had any association with the NRA, then you have to register with the city if you want to have a contract or do business with the city. So how can you, and not just you two, but any individuals running, as judges, how are you going to protect our rights? You say you're not going to be an advocate, but maybe there should be some advocacy for the rule of law and the Constitution. So just an opinion.
Yes. Well, first and foremost are the rights of the victim, and then the public. And that's, I think everybody in this room will agree, that's the first thing that judges will consider. How do I protect the public? How do I protect the victim? And there will be guidelines, and everybody will have the guidelines in front of them, and they'll say, no, I need a full protective order. I need an ankle bracelet, I need someone to do some electronic monitoring, or I'm going to set bail, or I'm going to send someone to jail. So I think that's first and foremost in every judge's mind, or should be, and I think it usually is. So I think that's our goal.
Right. And again, I'm just going to echo what Sydney said, but we don't, when I said I can't advocate from the bench, I can provide information. I can provide information to both sides. However, again, we're not legislating from the bench, and I am a judicial officer. I abide by the judicial canons, and that's very important to me. I took an oath to apply the law, to be fair, to be impartial, and I will do that and have done that. And so that's the safeguard, because people that walk through my doors will be ensured that they're going to get their day in court and be heard. And not everyone likes coming to court. You're coming to court because something bad happened, either criminal, family law, probate, whatever it is. And we have to understand that people are in a difficult place when they come to us. But we also have to apply the laws. If you did something bad, you're going to suffer the consequences. However, we have to look at what those consequences are. And so that's just one example. And I'm sure that the other candidates will speak to that as well. And we'd be happy to. You'll find my flyer on the table. You can email me. I'm very good about responding to email. There's a phone number as well. I'd be happy to answer questions in email. Please do look us up. I forgot to mention, I'm so bad, that I also have a website, so you can find more information about me, about my endorsements, about the work that I've done in the past, and what I do now. And so just one last thing before we go. I am endorsed by what we call the top brass of the LA Superior Court, and that's the presiding judge, the assistant presiding judge, and all of the supervisors, and not just in my assignment. So not just family law supervisors, but the criminal law supervisors, traffic supervisors. They know me, they know my work ethic, and they support me.
So again, we'll just tell you, I'm running in seat 16, Sydne Jane Michel, M-I-C-H-E-L. I have some cards on the table. And Veronica, you're in seat?
Number 4.
Number 4. So we're really, really happy to have had you. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us.
So
it was
much.
very nice.
Thank you so much.
Great. Tony, you ready? Yes. Okay. Yeah. We are, but maybe not tonight, and maybe after some of the court things we can do that, and possibly on November 2nd. But yes. Okay. Yes. You want Tony and Patty Hunter? Great. These are the candidates from which district?
Oh, I'm in seat number 16, 1-6. Tony is 6-0.
Okay. So, ladies and gentlemen, without further delay, Patty Hunter and Tony Cho. Go ahead.
Me, whatever you want. Hi, everybody. Patty Hunter. I am running in seat 16. So happy to be here. I am a Valley girl from the day I was born, which is a long time ago now. I work for the Los Angeles City Attorney's Office. I have worked in that office for a little over 29 years now. I prosecute misdemeanor cases. I do a great deal of domestic violence cases, violations of restraining order cases, DUI cases, hit and runs, on and on. Sometimes people say, well, a misdemeanor case, isn't that like a ticket? I literally had a case recently that was not filed as a felony case. It was filed as a misdemeanor, where the defendant was alleged to have taken a machete and threatened his wife with the children there. So we have some pretty serious cases, and I've been doing that for the better part of my 29 years with the City Attorney's Office. I have done significant civil law for about 4 years in the City Attorney's Office. I did employment law. I did some trials, which it's kind of unusual to do trials in civil litigation, but I did do trials, law in motion. I graduated from Loyola Law School in the top 2% of my class. I published on Law Review. I clerked for a federal judge. In that capacity, well, actually even before I passed the bar, right out of law school, what you do is you make recommendations to a federal judge. It was Judge Waters who I worked for. And so the motions and different briefs would come in. I would review them. I do supplemental research. and then make a recommendation to the judge. So that's how I cut my teeth on the law. I know one of the speakers before was talking about sort of being a financial, geek. I'm kind of a law geek. I love it. It's why I went to law school as the only person in my family who was going to law school or ever to be a lawyer. I just always wanted that. The thing about being a prosecutor that really called to me was that your obligation is to be fair and do justice. It's not to win. And you can do that in a manner that takes into account protecting the public, making sure that restraining orders are in effect and followed. It's one of my pet things as a prosecutor, is that if a court tells somebody to stay away, the victim has a right to have that taken very seriously if there's a violation. But, DUIs, keeping people off the street, or at least encouraged to not be drinking and driving, is a huge part of what we do to keep people safe. I think it was Veronica who said, and I just want to say again, that your judges really, really matter, because these are the people who decide liberty and money, and who get your child in a custody hearing, and if you need a restraining order, whether you get that. So I so very much appreciate everybody being out here to listen to the judicial candidates. I am, my website, I have these, I've given this to a number of you, but there's some over there as well. Patty Hunter, 4judge.com. You can look to find out about my qualifications and my values and my endorsements. Number of judges, organizations, elected officials, from Congress members to city councils in Los Angeles and throughout the county of Los Angeles, mayors, on and on, assembly members, state senators. I'm very, very proud of my endorsements, and I hope you'll take a look. These are the people who, we voted for. So I appreciate this opportunity to talk to all of you. Patty Hunter in seat number 1616.
Thank you. My name is Tony Cho. I am a candidate for LA County Superior Court Judge in seat number 60, that's 60. Let me start by telling you a little bit about myself. My parents were immigrants. They came to this country, basically they came to this country with nothing. When my dad first got to this country, he worked as a gas station attendant in the mornings, he went to school during the day, and then at night he had a second job as a janitor cleaning office buildings. My mom, she worked in a bank during the day, and after she was done with her job, she would go to my dad's job and help him clean office buildings. Not because she got paid to do it, but just because that she wanted him to get done with his work a little bit earlier, get home a little bit faster, and get a little extra sleep before having to start the whole day all over again. My parents worked harder than I can possibly imagine, but they did so because they wanted a better life for them, for their family and for themselves. And they were very successful in providing us with a better life. They had 3 kids. They put all 3 kids through college, and now all 3 of us went to law school, and all 3 of us are practicing attorneys. So that really is the American dream that I remember. That's the American dream that I grew up with. And to think that one of their kids now has the opportunity to be elected in LA County as a Superior Court judge is just something I think that far beyond anything that my parents could have dreamed of. I have been a lawyer for about 17 years. I have both experience in civil law and criminal law. My first 4 years out of law school, I was a civil attorney. The last 13 years, I've been a deputy district attorney with the LA County District Attorney's Office. For almost half my career in the DA's office, I've specialized in elder abuse prosecution. I prosecute people who physically abuse or murder elders. I prosecute people that sexually assault elders. I prosecute people that neglect elders by leaving them in the most inhumane conditions you can possibly imagine. I prosecute people that financially abuse them, scam them out of their life savings, steal their home out from under them. And when it was time for me in my career to choose a specialization, I chose to specialize in elder abuse because elders are among our most vulnerable and often overlooked segments of our society. My parents are elderly now, and I can't imagine what it would be like if somebody did anything to them like the way that people, the victims in my cases are treated. I just can't imagine that happening. So I'm so proud of the work that I do in the elder abuse section and the work that I've done in the LA County DA's office. Now, I also serve the community outside of the courtroom as well. For the last 9 years, I've served as an assistant staff judge advocate for the California State Military Reserve. That is a military lawyer with the State Military Reserve. And I do that because I provide, because I want to, there I provide free legal services to the brave men and women who risk their lives to defend our country. I also work with a program called Project Lead, and through this program I go to inner city schools and work with at-risk 5th grade students and educate them about the dangers of gangs and drugs, the importance of staying in school and getting an education. And in my free time I also work with different bar association and organizations, and I go to community centers, senior centers, and I try to educate the community about about elder abuse awareness and prevention, domestic violence awareness and prevention. And I do that on my free time. As far as my endorsements, Mr. Previn and I were talking earlier. He actually looked on my website, www.4judge.com, and he was looking through my endorsements. He said, that's a pretty comprehensive list of endorsements. I have been endorsed by almost 70 judges, LA County Superior Court judges, and that endorsement is important because judges know what it takes to be judges, and judges know my work and my reputation. I've also been endorsed by 6 different bar associations, over 50 elected officials, and a number of community organizations. Now, the elected officials that have endorsed me range from both ends of the political spectrum, prominent Democrats as well as prominent Republicans and everything in between. And I was being interviewed a couple weeks ago, and somebody said, you know, you've been endorsed by these Democratic leaders, but at the same time you've been endorsed by the Association of Sheriff's Deputies, the Union for the LAPD officers. You don't often see these people on these different ends of the spectrum agreeing. And how did you get that to happen, to get all of these endorsements? And my answer is simple. People on both sides of the political spectrum, all they want out of a judge is somebody that's going to be fair, that's going to be able to apply the law, that's going to be reasonable, compassionate when they need to be, and stern and forceful when they need to be. And each side, on the people on the political end of the spectrum, both sides have reviewed my career and have taken the time to get to know me and are supporting me in this election. And I would really appreciate your support as well. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Now, we're going to add Michael Ribons, a third judge, and he'll give us his, and then we'll have some questions for all of you.
Here, I'll move over.
Thank you. He's very helpful and strong.
Got it. I'll do.
Perfect. Okay. Without further delay, Michael Ribons.
Right. Thank you, Eric. My name is Michael Ribons. That's Ribons with 1 B. I want to thank the Neighborhood Council for having this forum. It's very helpful. And tell you a little bit about my background. I was born and raised here in the San Fernando Valley. As a teenager, I worked right down the street at Moorpark and Coldwater for a couple of years. I went to college here in the San Fernando Valley. I went to the LA Unified School District schools in the Valley. And my businesses are here in the Valley. So I've spent my entire life in the San Fernando Valley. My father is a Holocaust survivor, and the reason why I bring that up is because with what he went through, he instilled those values to myself and my 4 sisters. My parents worked very hard, as Tony's did. They raised us. I think that they gave us good morals, good values, and I've passed those morals and values down to my children who are now adults. Following my college career, I was an advisor in my early 20s to the 12th District for the City of Los Angeles, the 12th Council District. I've also been an elected member of the Neighborhood Council for the Woodland Hills Warner Center area, and I served several years there. I've testified and addressed the Los Angeles City Council on several occasions. I've been a realtor for over 30 years, also here in the Valley, and an attorney for over 22 years. I went to law school. I put myself through college and law school. That was a second career for me. And I've been very fortunate for the last 22 years to serve my clients. My clients range from low-income clients elderly clients, and small businessmen. I'm on the civil side, and that's unique in this race for a couple of reasons. One, I'm the only civil attorney that's running out of the 4 offices, and also I'm the only private sector candidate for the 4 offices. In the primary, there were 11 offices that were up for election, and the reason why 11 offices came up, which people always ask me, is because of the timing of retirements of sitting judges. It came at a time when the governor could not appoint judges, so those 11 seats go to the electorate to elect judges. Of the 7 offices that resulted in a clear winner in the primary, 5 of those went to prosecutors. 2 went to, one went to actually an incumbent judge who was challenged, and the last seat went to a state bar judge. So out of the 11 offices, I'm the only candidate standing from the civil side. The reason why that's important, and no disrespect to my colleagues here, is we do need diversity on the bench in where the background of the judges are. Anecdotally, I was just in trial this week. I had a judge who was a former prosecutor. He had been on the bench for about 11 years. 8 of those were as a criminal judge, the last 3 in civil. And he turned to myself and my opponent and he said, "You know better than I do," and gave us his background. He said, "I've been sitting on the civil bench for 3 years and I don't understand it. I don't know about it." And that's important to have civil judges or judges that come from the civil side of it, because at least half of the courtrooms are civil. Most of us, our interaction with the court, and the reason why judicial elections are very important at the county level, is you're either there for a traffic ticket, which is not fun for anybody. You are there for small claims action or civil action, dispute with your neighbor, family law, probate, but not on the criminal side. And so most of your interaction are going to be with judges that come from either a background that I have or judges that have heard those cases. Now, for the last 8 years, I've been a judge pro tem, and that is an appointed position. I've been appointed by 4 different presiding judges, both in Los Angeles and Ventura County. I have heard over 7,500 matters as a judge, and I have conducted as a judge or presided over about 250 to 280 trials. I can tell you, because it's a zero-sum game. There's a winner and a loser. It's not always clear-cut. But I can tell you from those 280 cases, while the litigants may not have liked my final ruling, they walked out of there, they felt that they were heard, that I considered the evidence in the case, and I applied the law. And you've heard it here before tonight, but that's what we are there to do as judges. We are there to take the facts and apply it to the law. We are not there to legislate. Legislation will leave to Mark Reed, who you're going to hear from in a moment, or Rudy, or Roxanne. They'll go and make the laws, and we will enforce them. There was a question earlier regarding following, I guess it was following the law. The supreme law in the United States, at least from a legislative standpoint, is the U.S. Constitution. In California, it's followed by the California Constitution, and then behind those are all of the statutes that the legislature puts in. As a judge, I am sworn to uphold both the U.S. and the California Constitution. That means when a case comes in front of me, if it's a due process issue, I'm going to be looking to the facts and applying it to the Constitution. If there's a violation of due process, I'm certainly going to make the ruling accordingly. If it's a First Amendment issue, and believe it or not, in state court in the County of Los Angeles, First Amendment issues come up in litigation, I'm going to rule based on the rule of law. I'm not going to go based on a tangent. Now, I'm also in the unique position to be an advocate sometimes and a judge other times. As an advocate, I'm advocating for my client. I'm trying to make the facts work in our favor and have the law apply to the best interest of my client. When I put the robe on and I go on the bench, because again, I do both, all of that goes out the window. At first, I thought it would be difficult to make that transition for me. It actually wasn't. Get on the bench. I know that I take it very seriously. I take the decision-making ability that I have, which will affect lives. Even on the civil side, it affects lives. It may not be an imprisonment, because as a pro tem I cannot sentence people or send them to prison. But I do take it very seriously. And again, when people come to my courtroom, they know that they're going to receive someone that's going to actively listen to what they are telling me. They are going to know that I'm going to be fair. They know that I have integrity, and they know at the end justice will be served. Now, of my assignments that I've sat, it's been a variety of different areas of law. I've sat traffic, small claims, unlawful detainers, civil harassment, and limited civil, which are civil cases less than $25,000. In most of the 280 or so trials that I've presided over, and the over 7,500 matters that I have heard, most of those are self-represented litigants. There are a small percentage that were attorney represented. And universally, people that have appeared before me have been very impressed. And again, when they walked out of that courtroom, they might not have liked my ruling, but they certainly understood it. And they certainly understood that it wasn't out of left field and that I actually applied the law. Endorsements, I'm endorsed by the LA Times, I'm endorsed by law enforcement, labor, both Democrats and Republicans. Again, my name is Michael Ribons, that's R-I-B-O-N-S, 1B. I have a website that you can go to. It's ribbons4judge.com. And even if you spell my name wrong and do it phonetically with 2 B's, you can still get to me. It'll still direct you there. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That's great. Thank you all. Do we have some questions for the judges? Yes, we have.
Hey, so we live in a time of extreme skepticism. Has that changed how you work with juries?
Go ahead.
Not with me. Maybe I'm naive, but I have great faith in our jurors. When I am in a trial and I'm picking a jury, we talk to them, we ask them questions, and try to get to know them as much as we can. Some of the questions may sound silly when we're talking to the jurors, but every question is asked for a reason, and it's to try to get to know our jurors. And I tend to find more often than not that most people that sit on jurors, that in the cases that I've handled, are reasonable people that just want to make the right decision. And I will tell you, I've done about 70 jury trials in my career, right around 60 felony jury trials, ranging from serious, violent, complex, high profile, you name it. And I will tell you that out of all the trials that I've done, maybe 3 cases were cases where I didn't agree with what the jury did. I take that back. Where I didn't understand what the jury did, or I thought they were absolutely wrong. There have been a couple jury verdicts where they might not have gone the way that I would have decided the case, but I looked at the jury verdict and I thought, well, I understand what they did, and I understand why they did what they did. And again, so I have great faith in our jury system. It's the best criminal justice system that we have in the entire world. So.
Yeah, I mean, I tend to agree. I started doing trials, mostly jury trials, when I started with the LA City Attorney's Office, which is, I think I already said, 29 years ago. And I agree. I think that when the jurors get the facts and they get the law, and if you explain it to them the way we should, they really work hard to do what's right. Again, it may not always be what I think the result should be, but I agree with Tony. You need to understand where they're coming from. And at the end of a trial, we typically get a chance to go in the hallway and speak to jurors to find out, what was it? And they might say, well, you know, if it's a not guilty, for example, they might say, well, I thought the victim was good, but not beyond a reasonable doubt, which is a super high standard in the law. I typically end my voir dire questioning of the jurors by saying, is there anything that you think either side would want to know about you that we didn't ask that might affect your ability to be fair and impartial? And sometimes that will bring things out. But typically, I think the people that are there really take it very, very seriously. You might be doing a DUI trial and somebody says, well, I was convicted of a DUI, or my family member was convicted of a DUI. You say, well, does that affect your ability to be fair and impartial? They say, no, I own it, I did it. Well, does that mean you'll think that the defendant is guilty because I'll look at the evidence. And so I tend to agree, and I do think jurors are cautious and take it seriously. I don't know if I would call it skepticism. I just think they take it seriously. Yeah.
Well, I think skepticism comes from a lack of information. I find that my job, a good part of my job, both as an attorney and litigator, as well as a pro tem, is educating the people in my courtroom, and that goes to juries as well. In the voir dire, the opening and closing, it is all about educating the jurors so that they can make the proper decision. I have not, in my practice, experienced jurors that were so far out with their findings that it wasn't understandable. Doesn't mean I didn't agree with them, or that I did agree with them, but at least I understood where they were coming from. And most people that sit on a jury do take it very, very, very seriously. I don't think I've ever met anybody, either on a trial that I've had or even just in speaking with people, that have said, I've sat on a jury and I didn't care what they said, I was going to find one way or the other. So our judicial system is not perfect, but it is the best in the world, and part of that is the jury system. It is very, very fair in most circumstances. Occasionally you get jury invalidation, but I think that's the rare case.
I was just going to ask a very quick question. And forgive my ignorance, but how long is the term you would be elected to, and then do you run for re-election, or how does that work?
So this is a question that we commonly get, and I guess I can answer for everybody. But basically, every judge in LA County is an elected term, elected office. It is a 6-year term. Now, what happens is that so every judge is an elected term, and every 2 years, a third of the judges are up for re-election. Now, what ends up happening is that sitting judges are very rarely challenged. We had one challenged in the primary election this year, but
He's pointing to me, but it was not me.
No. We had one challenge sitting judge this year. 2 years ago, I think we had one. But again, that's 1 out of 160 or so judges. Most judges are not challenged, and because they're not challenged, they do not appear on your ballot. So most people, and sometimes no judges are challenged, so no judges appear on the ballot. So that a lot of times people don't realize that judges are elected because you don't see them on the ballot all the time. And most of us, there are no term limits. There are no term limits. You can sit as long, as long as you're able.
But there's re-elections, which is what you were just talking about.
Yes, and so as far as all of us, when a judge retires by letting their seat, by not seeking re-election, it becomes an open seat. So all of us that you're hearing from tonight and that you're going to hear from next week are running in open seats, in a seat where a sitting judge had retired and was open for anybody to run in.
And there are 4 seats for LA County Superior Court judge in this November election. So that's basically what's left out of the people that were not elected in the primary. So there's
in LA County, I think it's somewhere around 470. I don't know exactly how many. With sitting commissioners like Commissioner Sauceda, I think the total number of bench officers is 520, something around there. Well, okay, so that's the other little wrinkle. So what happens when a judge retires in the middle of their term, in the middle of their 6-year term, then that becomes a seat that the governor can fill. And so the vast majority of judges that are on the bench are judges that were appointed by the California governor. And so and then once they're appointed and they come up for re-election, they're not challenged. So the majority of judges that are in the LA County, on the LA County Superior Court bench have never been through an election process because they've been appointed and reelected without being challenged again and again. So the few of us that have braved this election challenge will be, whoever is elected out of this election cycle will be the few that have gone through the process and gone out to the communities and met with you and talked to you and gotten your vote.
Right. And I want to add to that, because the second most common question, or actually the first most common question, is where are you going to sit? Where is it? In my office 113, where is that? Those are just placeholders. They are not tied to a courtroom or a courthouse. These are countywide elections, and it's simply so that the county registrar recorder can actually count the votes and say, okay, we have this much in this office and that much in that office. But all of us, when we get elected, we will be assigned a courtroom and an assignment by the presiding judge, and it could be anywhere in the county. It could be Pomona, Lancaster, Santa Monica, Long Beach, Van Nuys.
And if I may add, and any type of assignment. So, you know, they can put you in any of those locations, and in criminal or civil or family court. So we have no idea. Ultimately, I mean, we have our backgrounds and where we live, and I'm sure they take all of that into account with respect to, you know, their needs and where we can be most helpful. But it's anywhere in the county, and any voter in LA County can vote for us. So.
Is there any kind of mental health background check?
Well, I think it's called the bar exam.
Well, hopefully you see in talking to us, you know, what our you know, judicial temperament might
exactly.
be.
No,
I know you're
referring to the commute, but absolutely.
Oh,
no, that's
with
a good point.
that.
That's a good question too. Yeah, that could be tough because you never know. That would be, you're signing up. We appreciate your service. Was there another question?
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm back. I promise I'd be back. So I know this is a lofty question, but it really helped, I think, last time establishing you guys as individuals, as opposed to just like the tough but fair kind of approach we were talking about. But in your opinion, what is the biggest threat to equal justice under law here in California?
I was going to actually address that question even if you didn't answer it. So it's one word, and it's money. And I'll tell you why I say it's money. One of my pet peeves as a practitioner is going to court repeatedly for the same thing. My clients have to pay for my time. So when a judge won't make a decision, or kicks the can down the road, or decides whatever they want to decide and they're going to do it down the road, that costs everybody money. Now, not everybody that hires an attorney has a lot of money. In fact, probably the most common complaint, in fact, the second most common complaint against attorneys is the cost of services. And we have, as attorneys, we have very little control. As a judge, I do have control. One of the reasons why I'm running is I believe that I can bring a lot to the court in a variety of matters, but also expediency while achieving due process. We need to move these cases through faster. And the reason being is the state has underfunded the courts. The courts have, they have such a volume of cases, and if they don't get those cases and move the cases through as quickly as possible, and again, there are reasons sometimes to delay a case for due process, we're just going to get bogged down further and further. And it's unfair to the court employees who have to work harder to process the extreme volume of cases that come through. And it's true on the civil and the criminal side, both. The other side of the coin is, again, talking about money, right? Why it's unfair is we talked about bail reform. Now, as a pro tem that hears traffic, I sit all over the county. And when I first started doing it, one courthouse would have one policy, another courthouse would have another policy. But what I found is people were pleading guilty. And they were pleading guilty because if they didn't, they had to post bail, and they couldn't afford to post the bail. These are low impact cases. It's not a violent crime to roll through a stop sign. What we've done in the traffic courts is we have countywide almost done away with bail. There are certain circumstances which is up to the discretion of the judicial officer and in my courtroom, those are circumstances where they've already missed court appearances. And that indicates to me that they don't take it seriously. It costs all of us taxpayers a lot of money to run those courthouses and those courtrooms. And on the bail system, again, especially in high volume courtrooms like traffic, it was costing the county a lot of money. They had to staff the offices to post the bail. They have to process refunds, and it made little sense. And most of those offenders made their court dates without any issue. So, you know, that's a problem. On the criminal side, if you can afford an attorney and you're not eligible for a public defender, again, it costs you a lot of money. And believe it or not, I'm sure my colleagues here will tell you, because they don't prosecute every case, that sometimes a defendant is innocent when they go to trial, but it costs them a lot of money. So money is it's not the equalizer, but it's the problem in the justice system that we have to address. We can't address it on a legislative basis because we don't legislate from the bench, but we can address it in the way that we run our courtrooms, and we can make it much more fair and better access for all citizens to get into court.
Yeah, I would add, and I think it's just adding, not saying anything different, that it's critical that people have access to the courts. In the criminal courts, they do have access to attorneys always, and that would be a public defender, or if there's a conflict, an alternate public defender, and then they have private attorneys down the line and things like that. So they have access to lawyers, and I will tell you, some of the public defenders are some of the best lawyers I've ever seen. There's also great private attorneys. So sometimes, you know, a criminal defendant will come in and they'll say to the judge, I want a real lawyer, I don't want a public defender. And having been a prosecutor for as many years as I have, I can tell you that, you know, those folks, they're tapped. They have a lot of work to do, and it's important work. But, you know, some of them are really fabulous lawyers. I find also that just having the resources for creative solutions, because the people that come into court, with some exceptions, really serious exceptions, they're going to be back out on the street. Or they'll never be in custody at all. And some of them need mental health care and, you know, drug or alcohol treatment, anger management. And we try as much as we can, or I should say I do, when a defense attorney comes to me and says, look, can we get a program for this person? Can we do a little bit about what we were talking or hearing about before? But we need resources for that. If we're going to help people with drug problems or alcohol problems or anger management or you know, mental health, we need resources. And I'm not sure if that really goes to your question, but I do think it's really important for the people that come into court. So they need access. They need the courts to be efficient. They need decisions made and still all of their rights protected, and it's a delicate balance. And you know, for me, again, I've been in a courtroom almost every day for over 30 years. I've seen efficient judges and not as efficient judges. You know, you need efficiency, and you need people to know that they've been heard and that their rights have been protected, and it is a delicate balance for sure.
Yeah, I think there's a couple major obstacles in the criminal justice system. One is, as Patty was talking about, the lack of resources that we have available to us for to address issues that we see in our cases, whether it's mental health or substance abuse issues, things like that. The other is, I think, a lack of public confidence in the justice system. You know, any system of government only works if the people believe in it. And I think over the last few years, I think we've had more and more issues where people don't believe in the justice system that we have, that maybe it's only for the rich, or maybe it doesn't work to do, there's too much incarceration and not enough rehabilitation or treatment for mental health, or whatever the issue is. And I think there is a I think the confidence is failing in the system. And so the best way to address that is to work, we're not policymakers, and as judges we wouldn't be, but it's up to our legislatures and our law enforcement agencies and our policymakers to get together to try to work to find solutions to these problems that we have. And I think as a judge, what could I do to do that is to handle every case as fairly as I can, so that the people that come on my court walk away knowing with a greater appreciation for the system, understanding what happened in that system, understanding my rulings, being fair. And I think that's what I can do as an individual, if elected as a judge, to restore public confidence. But the greater issues are societal, and it's up to all of our policymakers, law enforcement agencies, and everybody else to try to work together to try to achieve these solutions.
We have to get to the next speakers, but I have a couple more. Any other questions that are burning a hole in anyone's pocket? No, okay, so I just wanted to ask one quick question about justice delayed being justice denied. My experience in court, which is limited, I've never been involved really in criminal court, but in civil court, is it takes forever. And everybody seems extremely frustrated, including the judges. And I'm wondering, is this due process?
Well, no, it's not due process. The problem is every judge manages their courtroom. And as Patty said, you know, some are efficient and some are not. I've been in front of countless judges that were not efficient at all. And what you just, the sentiment that you just stated are echoed by my clients. You know, it's not cheap to keep sending your attorney down to court. It's not cheap for the litigants. It's not cheap for the county or the state either. And I think it's vitally important that the judges that are on the bench that are efficient, but that there is a balancing act. You need to have due process in mind. There has to be fundamental fairness for everybody in the court system. That's the only way we're going to maintain the integrity. On the civil side, yeah, I share your frustration. There's nothing worse to me, even though I'm getting paid, to have to go to court 3 or 4 times on the same exact issue, or to have a judge say, I'll take it under submission, and you don't hear from them for 3 or 4 or 5 months.
Yeah, and it's stressful for litigants and to be there and not have some resolution. And one of the things that reminded me of, to me, one of the most important things about a judge and what they can do is really listen and understand where the parties, and even in our situation, victims, where they're coming from, what their fears are, what it is they're trying to accomplish, so that you can resolve things in a way, you know, where either nobody's 100% happy or everybody feels that they at least have been heard. And so I'm really, really big on trying to resolve matters in a way that everybody kind of buys into. When an attorney comes to me, one of the first things I say to them is, they're not necessarily going to get this, but I say, what is it your client wants? When I talk to a victim, I say, I'm not necessarily going to promise you that you're going to get this, but what is it you want? I want a restraining order. I want, you know, whatever it is, so that you listen and you try to come up with something which then makes it a more, just a more efficient process, and one where people buy into whatever it is. Oh, my client doesn't want to go to jail, but they're willing to do XYZ. Well, XYZ might be better for the community and for the victims, and it resolves things quicker. So listening and letting people have a voice and figuring out what's the best way in my situation to keep the community safe, to keep the victim safe, and still be efficient. Everything doesn't have to go to trial, and that is efficient.
Thank you. Tony, a brief response, and then we'll each do a little wrap, and I very much appreciate you all coming.
So just very quickly, I just want to echo what the other candidates have said, absolutely. You know, it starts with the top. It starts with the judge. Judge sets the tone. If the judge is there on time at 8:30 when the doors open and ready to do business and prepared on every one of their cases, like I hope to be, then that sets the appropriate tone. When you have judges that show up late and don't take the bench till 9:30, 9:45 or something like that, then that's a problem. It's important for judges to try to, as Patty said, to try to get the parties to resolve early. There's nothing that drives me crazier as a trial attorney than to work on a case and have that's been is set for pretrial and pretrial and pretrial again when we're ready for trial, and then on the day of trial the case settles after everybody has put all this time and work into this case. And the same is true as when I was a civil attorney. It never made any sense to me that we would spend thousands upon thousands upon thousands of dollars in cost of defense on a lawsuit when we could resolve it earlier for something similar that we're going to get at the end of the day. So
absolutely, yeah. Thank you all. Tell us your name and your website if you like, and then thanks for coming.
My name again is Michael Ribons, R-I-B-O-N-S. I'm running for Superior Court Judge, Office 113. The website is Ribons4Judge, that's the number 4.com. Thank you.
Patty Hunter, I'm running in seat number 1616. I am for the first time in my life on social media, so I hope you go to my website and look at my social media because I'm kind of proud of it, and it's got a lot of good stuff on it. And it's Patty Hunter, P-A-T-T-I, Hunter, number 4judge.com. And I really appreciate you all being here.
My name is Tony Cho. I am a candidate for LA County Superior Court Judge in seat number 60, that's 60. And my website is www.cho4judge.com. And you can also find me on Facebook. And again, just like everyone else says, I thank you all for your time and staying all the way till 8:14. And I really appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you. Great. Okay, now we have, ladies and gentlemen, Alex Villanueva, who is running for the Sheriff of Los Angeles County, is here to speak with us, and he's going to address us, followed by Mark Reed, who is, I think you can both, well, we'll let him give his speech, and then you can drop in a minute and do yours. And then, is it Mr. Marshall? Yeah, and we're also going to hear from the State Equalization Board candidate from the 3rd District, who is here too, G. Rick Marshall, which I will never get wrong. Thank you. Okay, so we'll start with these two, and then you can join them after. So a short intro from each of you, and then maybe we can do a, take your time, but go for it.
All right, let me make it real simple here. I'm Alex Villanueva, candidate for Sheriff of LA County. I just retired after 32 years with the Sheriff's Department. I have a doctorate in public administration. Prior to the department, I was active in the Air Force and then Army National Guard. So I did a total of 10 years of military service. I taught criminal justice at Cal State Long Beach for 4 years. I rose through the ranks, and I came across an obstacle in the middle of my path up through the ranks called Libak and Paul Tanaka. And that proved to be very career-ending in the sense of ascension. However, it did prove very important in terms of what brings me today to run for the office of sheriff. I have the institutional knowledge, and I have a long history of actually fighting corruption, taking it head on. And we have to do that today after 4 years of failed leadership. So I'm going to make it real simple, and let's get to stuff that you folks want to know.
Great. Let's hear a brief intro from Mr. Reed, and then we'll go right to the questions.
My name is Mark Reed. I'm running for United States Congress, 30th Congressional District. I'm a lifelong resident of the San Fernando Valley. I was in business management until I was 26 years old, where I bought out my first company. From there, I started a retail store at 28 years old. I bought another company at 32 years old. I've been the national rep for American Indians for 15 years, dealing with government-to-government issues. I've been on the board of directors of the Screen Actors Guild and the KCET. I've been the chairman of several national committees and several local committees. My biggest and most prideful achievement in life is I met my wife when I was 11 years old. I gave her a promise ring at 16 years old. We married at 21 years old. I have 3 adult children and 10 grandchildren. I'm running for the United States Congress because I'm a lifelong resident of the San Fernando Valley, and we've watched this valley deteriorate over the years. You're looking at two people up here. The sheriff is the most powerful elected official in the United States of America. And they have one of the most misunderstood jobs in the county of Los Angeles, and what he does and the power that he has and how he controls so many things. Same thing with the United States Congressman in your district. People will look at the federal government and say, what does the federal government do for you? And they say, well, we don't know, nothing. And it's not because the federal government doesn't do anything for you, it's because your congressman is actually doing nothing for you. The feds can do a tremendous amount. I'm going to touch on one subject that I'm sure I'll get a lot of questions about, because I have on my cards out here is touching on homelessness, mental health care, and drug rehabilitation. What we're looking at now, and Alex can attest to this as well, is 60% to 70% of our inmates are drug rehab people and mental health care patients, because we have a recidivism rate. These people need serious help. And until we really deal with the root causes of these things, we're going to continue incarcerating them on unrelated charges, and it doesn't help those individuals. So on my website, I have a 30-page detailed plan of a federal government program that will create 30-day intake centers for the worst of the worst, because the faith-based organizations in the community, along with the city and the county, have very good programs to help people who want help. But the people who don't want help are being left on the streets, and they're extremely dangerous, or they get picked up and they're put in prison and they're not being given the help. To prosecute an individual and put him in prison for the first year, it's about $178,000. It's $78,000 a year to incarcerate them, and it costs about $100,000 to hook them up, arrest them, prosecute them, and put them in prison. So we're going to save a tremendous amount of money there in dealing with the root causes of the problem. So this 30-day intake center I'm talking about is where you have the sheriff's department or you have the police departments picking up the individuals who are obviously mental health care or major drug addicts. You bring them into the 30-day intake center, you process them, you find out their family, you talk to the families, you give them a complete thorough assessment of mental health care, you give them an assessment of the drug rehabilitation that they need, and then you find the resources that they need. You go after the resources in place in there, what they need. The federal government needs to get back into having short-term and long-term mental health care hospitals and facilities so they can get the help. Because you can determine that somebody has a mental health care issue, and you go ahead and you say, okay, you need to see a doctor once a week. They see the doctor once a week. They get their meds. What do? They take the meds, they go sell them on the street, and they go buy what they want because they've spent years of self-medicating on drugs that they like. So we need to really address the root causes of mental health care, drug rehabilitation, and the homelessness. With that, I'll go ahead.
Alex, that's a good point. And Alex, does the experience of having been a deputy on patrol over the years, have you encountered a lot of the confusion of dealing with mental health and the law? And what do you think the county sheriff's department can be doing to improve the way it's going, with these high numbers of having to deal with a population that's often, mentally ill and such?
Well, 31% of our inmate population in the county jail is under some form of psychiatric care. They could be in high-end housing, which are the extremely mentally ill that can't be trusted even with another person side by side, to the very low one, which they're on some form of psychiatric medication, but they're in general population. So you have a whole range of different types of inmates. But 31% of the population, which is a huge chunk. Our county jail is the largest mental health institution in the entire nation, and not by design, just by default, unfortunately. Our system we have in place right now is a very broken system because we have a revolving door between homelessness and, like he mentions, the drug abuse issue. And people that actually, if we take it a step back, back in Reagan's days when we deinstitutionalized our mental health care, those people didn't just disappear, they hit the streets. And a lot of them have actually been on the streets since those days. People that are now in their 70s and 80s, they're homeless. You can trace their homelessness all the way back. So we have to actually provide alternatives to incarceration, community-based alternatives for mental health. And I don't believe in building another jail on top of the problem we have right now, because all we're doing is exacerbating the same problem. The worst place possible for therapeutic care for someone who's mentally ill is the confines of a jail facility, and is also the most expensive. So we're doing the worst thing and we're paying the most for it. So we gotta get some common sense here.
I have a proposal. Maybe Mr. Marshall could join us for a moment up at the panel, and we'll veer the conversation a little towards cannabis, because I think that that's something that we're all facing, and the State Board of Equalization may or may not have anything to do with that. But we'll start with a little presentation from Rick Marshall, who is running for the State Board of Equalization.
Thank you.
And then we'll come back to the conversation. Thank you.
Yes, my name is G. Rick Marshall. I'm running for State Board of Equalization. I'd like to thank Eric Previn and the Studio City Neighborhood Council for the opportunity to be here tonight. State Board of Equalization has nothing to do with cannabis, but I appreciate you inviting me north up here to talk. You needed an excuse to get me up here, and I think you did very well. If I could just tell you what the State Board of Equalization does. Their duties are to review the property tax assessments in all 58 counties of California. We set the income taxes for insurance companies, for the public utilities, and for railroads. Plus, if you drink, we set the excise tax on alcohol.
That is, I will just defend that seemed like a reasonable thing to imagine. You might also regulate the cannabis.
Well, yeah, there's lots of, and let me just say that there are members of the current Board of Equalization that favor a California bank for cannabis, and they see lots of money there. I don't know. It's difficult to say. I think we've got states who are laboratories for cannabis right now that I think are letting us see which way it works. And I guess if California wants to be in the front of all this, they can, but we've got a lot of problems ourselves right now. And in my city, I sit on the Planning Commission in Torrance, and we had to deal with that, whether we were going to open our city to cannabis, and we have a moratorium on it at the moment because we wanted to see just what's going to happen.
Do we have any questions from the crowd?
Yeah, I had a question or two for Mr. Villanueva, Officer Villanueva. I don't know. Yeah, you said in your statement, I think it's with it's on votersedge.org, you made a statement that there are certain programs in place that force officers in prisons to defend themselves. I could look at exactly what I'm looking at. It seemed, sorry. Sorry, what was the one I was looking at? Policies that reward assaultive behavior from inmates and tie the hands of deputies to defend themselves have caused assaults on staff. What I want to know is it possible to get to a place where there is no assaults, no violence between officers and inmates in the prisons? And if not, what specifically can be done, to curtail violence at prisons?
Very good question. There's actually kind of like this microphone. If you want to measure violence in the county jail system, it's a three-pronged system, or a three-pronged phenomena. You have the use of force that deputy personnel used against inmates, which is the one that the incumbent was obsessing about, the ACLU, and there was a lot of focus on bringing that number down. But they neglected to measure the inmate-on-inmate violence, and then the assaults of inmate against staff, both sworn and professional staff. Those two figures have gone through the roof, to the point that they're actually starting to make news now. You heard about the case of the custody assistant at the Lakewood City County in the Lakewood Sheriff's Station. She was brutally assaulted, her nose was broken, eye socket crushed by an inmate who was twice her size. That actually was a better scenario than what happened roughly 3 weeks later. A female deputy at Twin Towers Correctional Facility had her ear bitten off. Her scalp was torn off, and she was assaulted by an inmate who was both hepatitis C and HIV positive. And this was a week before her wedding. That is becoming too common, that level of violence. Last year, for the first time in the history of the Sheriff's Department, you had 3 deputies who were actually shanked, which is being stabbed or cut by improvised cutting instrument manufactured by the inmates. That never made the news. You didn't hear a press conference from the sheriff about that. And then he says the use of force is down 60% from 2009. He got into office in the end of 2014. So 5 years happened from 2009, which was the heyday of the Paul Tanaka work in the gray area problems in the jail that you're alluding to. A lot happened in those 5 years. I was a watch commander from 2011 to 2014 in one of the county jails. In the year 2012 alone, we saw a 50% drop in use of force that was reported. So we actually were working hard. We weren't sitting our butt waiting 5 years down the road for someone to show up. So when he tries to take credit for the work of others, I say, no. Let's measure what the force level was in 2014 when he entered office to today, and then, okay, then we have a basis of comparison. But it's extremely disingenuous to say, oh, let's measure from 2009 to today, because now you're taking credit for other people's work. We have to measure the entire thing. We can't have the pendulum be so far the 2009 model, or today the 2018 model, which is open season on staff and on other inmates. The organized crime element inside our county jails is controlling the jails right now. They are assaulting other inmates at will. They're engaged in multiple acts of extortion and threats. Inmates, once they're in the jail system, they're at risk, unfortunately. Organized crime is going to tax them literally to use the phone, to go into the commissary. All these simple things, they're being taxed. The drugs, the county jails are awash in drugs right now. The sheriff admitted that in June of this year, there was 14 inmates who are overdosed on narcotics inside the county jail. If that gives you an idea how prevalent drugs are in the jail. I worked for 4 years as a deputy back in the 80s, and then 2011 to 2014, 2.5 years. That's 6.5 years. I saw 2 cases of overdose in 6.5 years. He got 14 in 1 month. That tells you how the entire system has become destabilized under his policy. Deputies have to be able to defend themselves and assert control over the inmate population.
Is that the best and only sort of way of dealing with violence and gangs in prisons? Is force, or is there any other policies?
You have to have good leadership. You have to be assertive in doing your job, because unfortunately there's a certain segment of the inmate population, they're there because you don't want them on the street. They'll look at you and say, chump, and they're going to take your money. And there's not a whole lot you're going to do about it. Those are the people, once we remove them from society because of the threat they pose, now we have to actually deal with them inside the jail system. They're not the nicest people in the world. Other people are there for a lot of different reasons, and they're harmless. But you have a core group that actually are the problem. You have to deal with them assertively, constitutionally. We're not going to violate anyone's civil rights. We're not going to beat anyone to bloody pulp. But we can't permit this pendulum to go so far to the other side that everyone's afraid to actually actively defend themselves. It doesn't work that way. His plan is too far to the other side. Tanaka's plan was that way. I'm looking for the middle where everyone has the right to be safe and secure in their person, both the inmate population and the employees. I have female nurses that are afraid to go work inside the county jail now because they have to go through a gauntlet of sexual battery just to get their job done. Because the inmates will grope them, grab them, and then they'll put their hands up and say, you can't touch me. I've had inmates cold cock a deputy, knock him unconscious, and then a supervisor will go and protect the inmate from the other deputies trying to secure the inmate and not find out about the condition of the deputy who's not cold on the floor. And by the way, that deputy ended up retiring with a severe head injury because when his head bounced off the wall and on the ground, he's in bad shape today. We have to have some common sense. He has no idea. He never ran the incumbent to jail in his life. I have. I understand how they operate, how they can work successfully. But it starts with leadership.
I'm going to add a little bit to that because it's like Alex talked about, 31% of the inmates have a mental health care from minor to major. What you're discussing is the assaults on deputies within the jail systems of individuals that probably have some serious mental health care issues and or drug addictions. They're on drugs in the jails. There's got to be a major cleanup, but the cleanup happens prior to these inmates getting to prison. How do we assess them? How do we figure out where they need to be? Because the deputies inside the jails are at risk all the time, and these guys are huge. A friend of mine is a detective over at LAPD in Devonshire Division. There was a homeless guy who picked up a 6'3" LAPD officer, body slammed him on the ground, broke his back. This guy is on desk duty for the rest of his life. So we need to really start assessing individuals prior to them getting to the jail systems, prior to them getting arrested, and know exactly what services they need and get those services to them. If it's mental health care, they need to have it. But it has to be outside of the prison system because the prison system only makes it worse and puts individuals at risk that are working in the prison systems. I also want to address the cannabis issue that you brought up since you asked Rick that one, because it's a federal issue more than anything. The cannabis issue is it really needs to be taken out of the CSA 1 class 1 division and brought over to the FDA. You know, basically taken out of the Department of Justice and put it over to the Food and Drug Administration, because there are several medical uses for cannabis at this point in time. I am not for recreational use because I'm 61 years old. It used to be a felony when I was a kid to smoke marijuana. Now you can sit there on a street corner, and I'll tell you, every fifth car that drives by, you can smell them smoking weed. These are DUIs right there. The police department can't do anything about them because they don't have the resources. And even if they do bust them for a DUI, they can't send them to jail. They can't do anything with them. So I'm not for recreational use of marijuana at all. I'm also not for jail time for them, arresting them and putting them in jail. It's kind of like a neutral position. If you want to smoke weed at home, smoke weed at home. But there's also been several medical studies that have been done on the brain of individuals maturing from the teenager up to, the brain doesn't stop maturing until you're 30 years old. So the cannabis that's out there now is not like it was when I was a kid. It is very strong and powerful, and it does change the chemical makeup of a kid's brain. And a habitual use of it creates schizophrenia, it creates paranoias, it creates a real altered personality. So we cannot allow it to be accepted as a complete recreational use, but at the same time, it shouldn't be totally criminalized as well. But it does need to be taken out of the CSA 1, Class 1, and dropped over in the FDA, so this way the states can regulate it, extract the how would you say, medicinally used components out of it, because a lot of the medicinally used components out of it, you don't get high off it. It actually works for you. It is very powerful medicine. And a lot of people have come, how would you say, relying on that medicine. A lot of the veterans with PTSD, it works quite well. There's a multiple of uses of medical marijuana at this point without getting high.
Thank you. We have there are a lot of propositions on the ballot, and Measure W, the county water. Now, my question is, are there any that you would like to say something about in the lightning round as we head for the end here? Because we're going to be back November 2nd, and certainly we'll try to discuss those issues with some experts, but we are so blessed with so many of you that we are facing near the end here because we have to be out of the library at 9. So let's take a few minutes each to kind of give us your wrap up, and if you want to include any plugs for the measures that you care about, that would be great. If not necessary, but you're welcome to tell us what we should be looking at on our ballots in addition to pulling the lever for each of you.
I think we'll start off with Rick, since he's handling our tax money.
Well, yes, I would just say that if your proposal of putting cannabis out of the Class 1A status, then it allows banking and a bunch of other things like that, and that's the problem with cannabis from my perspective at the moment. As far as propositions, I'm endorsed by the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association, so I'm a strong Proposition 13 supporter. I favor Proposition 5, which allows extending the assessment to next property that you buy and take it wherever you want in California. I also favor the reduction of our gas tax, even though it's got a ballot statement that's deceptive. I think it's the problem we have right now. There was an article that came out the other day that said, forget the gas tax. What about forget the extra gas tax? What about the 22 cents that's hidden? Where does that go? And you read through the article, and at least 3 cents of it's going to the bullet train. We are sending our tax money, our gas tax money, a lot of different places than the roads. And I fear that this gas tax money, that if it's approved, if the repeal is not approved, that money will be used elsewhere, and our roads will not be improved. I'm sure you've driven all around and seen the signs, your tax dollars at work. I think I must commend the governor and his allies for doing that, but that's just campaigning is all I see it as. I also am opposed to the Proposition 10, the rent control initiative. I'm afraid that it's not the solution to the problem. I agree. Rents are too high. There's a housing shortage. Housing is too high, all of those things, but I think I sit on the Planning Commission in my local city of Torrance, and the problem there is supply. It's not rent control. And when you start controlling rent, you're going to have things happen that you don't like. Now, it's a segue to my opponent, which I'd like to talk about just a little bit. He's a councilman in the city of Santa Monica. That's where rent control is king. And Santa Monica's got some nice places. I don't want to take anything away from it. But there's a lot of apartments there that are very low rent, and people sit on them, and it just takes the supply out as well. I guess to wrap this up is that if you get a chance, Google Tony Vasquez on on Los Angeles Times, there's a January article that talks about what I call the whiff of scandal. And we elect too many politicians with a whiff of scandal. I think just recently we witnessed the resignation of Assemblyman Matt Davenay here in San Fernando Valley because he had a whiff of scandal. And I think we need to take a look at that. I offer you a clean slate. My slogan is public service, not self-service, because I think that's what my opponent will do, is have self-service. And we need somebody in the State Board of Equalization that's going to stand up and talk about the challenge to Prop 13 that's going to be on the ballot in 2020. And I want to be that voice, and I ask for your vote. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I'm applying actually for an executive position, branch of government, so I don't get to legislate or go back and forth. I will plug, however, Measure W for the county. Capturing the water is a no-brainer. We're in the desert. We need a lot of water. There's not enough. So we got to do everything we can to get that water. However, I'm pretty sure there's going to be people that believe otherwise. There are other ways to do it. I say bring it to the table. But I'm going to say the same thing of Proposition 10. Because people say, well, it's a bad idea, and I say, okay, well, let's offer the alternative then. What is the alternative? I haven't heard that one yet. We don't have enough housing. We had a 75% increase in homelessness in 6 years, and that was with no rent control. So we have a free market, a free economy right now operating, so basically under the ideals of those that Proposition is 10, reality today is really not making a very strong argument that somehow the status quo is actually improving the situation. It's actually, we're getting worse. We have to do something. And unfortunately, today's economy, the pace is growing, we're creating an entire society of people that are castaways, that nothing ever gets to them. They're not part of the economic engine. They've fallen off for whatever the reason may be. Hard times, bad timing, could be financial situation, could be a health crisis, anything. And occasionally those rent hikes that gets people to become homeless. People live check to check. One small, blip in what's happening in their day-to-day lives, and then they're homeless. It's a big challenge. So I don't have the answer to that. However, as Sheriff of Los Angeles County, that is my challenge of the 21st century, is homelessness. I have to deal with the impact of that throughout the entire county. So I'm going to work with the mayor, I'm going to work with the Board of Supervisors, LA City Council, the Homeless Authority, the Measure Triple H that has now a huge pot of money, and how we're going to figure out to actually start repurposing in the downtown corridor structures that we could possibly use. And of course, we have to fight about the whole NIMBYism thing, because no one wants a solution to homelessness in their backyard, but the homeless are in their backyard already. So there has to be some solution. People are going to have to figure out a way to, debate this issue civilly and come up with common sense solution. And my proposal is one is take ownership of the situation, show some leadership, and we're going to have a healthy dose of compassion, a healthy dose of common sense, and a little bit of tough love. Combination of all three to get the ball rolling and start actually turning the tide to shrink the population instead of just sitting back and say, what can we do as it continues to grow? To date, we've only spent 1% of that measure's money. 1%. Mm-hmm. And in that same time, the homeless situation continues spiraling out of control. For those of you that work in the downtown corridor, all you got to do is see all the pup tents everywhere, even at the Hall of Justice. People that park in adjacent parking lots to go to the hall, they have to step over a bunch of the homeless people sleeping on the sidewalks. So it's not like the sheriff doesn't notice it. So we got a lot of work to do, and I'm just asking your support on November 6th to make a difference.
Thank you, Sheriff. Alex.
My name is Mark.
Yeah, keep talking.
My name is Mark Reed. I'm running for the 30th Congressional District, and pertain up, lights are off, so there we go. They're back on again. Boy, oh boy, God is telling me something now. My name is Mark Reed. I'm running for the 30th Congressional District, and like I said before, everybody asks, what does the federal government do for you? And everybody says nothing, so they have no interest in voting, but the federal government can do a tremendous amount. As pertaining to the propositions, All you have to do is go to craighuey.com, and he has the most extensive review of every proposition there. But I'm going to give you a couple little takes on the propositions. Prop 10, about the homes issues. It takes 6 years to get a track map approved for the state. It takes another 3 years to get it through the county, and then you have to deal with local jurisdiction. What person in their right mind as a developer is going to put that much money into a project for 10 years before they break ground? This is why we have a home shortage in the state of California. It has nothing to do with the lack of resources. It has nothing to do with the lack of space. It has nothing to do with anything of the desire of the people to build houses. It has an executive position of the individuals that are running the state. I mean, there's a logjam there. They want more money. They want more out of the developers. They stymie everything. As pertaining to the gas tax, very simple. With 22 cents a gallon federal gas tax goes to Washington, D.C. It's a 40-60 split at this point. But the congressmen of both Republican and Democrats have to advocate for the Federal Department of Transportation grants for projects. In 2016, they only went for one, a $53 million project out of Long Beach. We have $700 billion worth of infrastructure needs of repair and replace, not new stuff, just repair and replace. That goes to our dams, water systems, bridges, and roadways. We have a massive executive shortage of brains in the state of California at this point. And that's what it boils down to. It's not resources, it's not money, it's not this. And then when Alex talks about, the resources, yes, HHH has got almost $8 billion in it. The state of California's got $8 billion as well that have been already allocated for homelessness, mental health care. But we have the lack of brains of putting a project together to deal with it in a proper manner. The federal government's got $60 billion that have been allocated out for drug addiction of the fentanyl and the opiate issues, homelessness and mental health care. Where are the brains in the projects bringing them back to our districts to be able to put these programs in place? The city of Los Angeles does not have resources for mental health care and drug addiction. They have the resources via the county. So these NIMBYism issues and stuff with the bridge housing, this is all volunteer. So once they get into a bridge house, if they don't want to take the mental health care, drug programs, they don't have to. So they'll be in there for 4 months, they kick them out, they're back on the street again. We need serious leadership at this point. This is what I'm offering as the next congressman of the 30th district. And it's not about Republican or Democrat. It's not about right or left. It's about your values. What do you value as a community? What do you value as a citizen? What do you value and what you want to pass down to your next generation of your grandchildren and the citizens in the community here? That's what this election is about. So don't get stuck in your head about Republican or Democrat. Forget that. What do you want in your community? You want a good sheriff? You want a good tax collector? You want a good congressman? You're looking at 3 right here.
Great. Thank you very much. One final thought, which is this. How has your experience been as challengers? Have your opponents been open to conversation and available?
I'll address that real quick with me.
Yeah, lightning round. 30 seconds or less.
The American Legion Hall, synagogues, churches, Battered Women's Organization, the California Medical Association, another church right now, they've all offered, actually another organization that deals with the special needs community, which is huge here. Their services are being cut left and right. They have all offered through the League of Women Voters debates/forums in the district. And Mr. Sherman has turned them all down because he doesn't want to be held accountable to the issues that have gone on in his office, as was brought up Matt DeBobny. The sexual rape, harassment, and assault charges that have come out of his office is unbelievable, and he doesn't want to be held accountable. So he has not agreed to. He's not agreed to anything.
But he agreed to one debate, I think. But
yeah, it's on my website at markreedforcongress.com.
But he has been unavailable, basically, to talk to you.
He's only available to go ahead and at high schools, he's talking to 12th grade graduates. That's all he's made himself available to.
Alex?
My opponent agreed initially to attend a debate sponsored by the ACLU, and he didn't show up. I had to debate an empty chair. It had his picture and a sign that said missing on it. They had 3 sponsored debates at ACLU in the runoff. He didn't show up to a single one. We had 2 sponsored in the primary. He didn't show up to a single one.
Was there an excuse?
He said that I attack him. Yes. Basically, he's afraid to debate me in public. We had one debate, but it happened in private, behind closed doors. And that's when one of the unions, one of the sheriff's unions that coincidentally, the only one that has endorsed him, agreed with him to kick out all the public that had tickets. There was 300 people that wanted to see the debate and had tickets already reserved, and they were all kicked out. Oh. So the debate occurred in private. It didn't go very well for him.
Right.
But just
thank you,
just
Rick.
to tell you what's going on.
Yeah, thank you.
My opponent is measuring the drapes in the Board of Equalization office because he believes he's already been elected. So he's ignoring me. I'm just trying to get out the word. Of course, you know, in a district as big as mine is, it's all of Ventura County, LA County south of the San Gabriel Mountains to the sea, west of the Orange County line with the exception of city of Pomona, and then the city of Chino Hills and San Bernardino. It's a huge district, and it just takes a lot of money, and I have to say that I'm not the prolific fundraiser I should be.
Well, thank you for coming out, and I will make it clear that this will be available on our website, and you can take pieces of it as you like. And Mark, you can wrap it up. Sure.
We do have a debate where Mr. Sherman has been invited. It's at the House of Light Church on Londelius, right off of Tampa. It's this Sunday at 6 o'clock. It's on my Facebook site at 2018. And you can look at it. You can call Mr. Sherman's office and request him and demand him to be held accountable to the district and to the constituents of the district rather than his donors in Washington, D.C.
Alex?
The private debate was live streamed by Channel 7 ABC. It is on YouTube. Go to the YouTube search engine, type in Sheriff's Debate 2018, and you'll see it there. It's about an hour and 15 minutes in length.
And for the record, you were all very kind to come tonight. We will extend one more invitation to your opponents, and if they agree, we will certainly invite you to join them. And thank you for coming out to Studio City. We really appreciate it. And that concludes our event for tonight. Thank you.